All right, I think we have a quorum, so I'm going to go ahead and bring the meeting to order at 8:32. We'll go through, do a quick roll call. So, looks like, okay. Excellent. So we're going to do a quick roll call. So, Suzanne, if you would mind just calling the roll.
Sure. Patrick Brown.
You're on mute, Patrick. Oh, you're still on mute, Patrick. Let's come back to Patrick after he's got his mute sorted out.
Okay. Kim Gleason.
Here.
Tammy Colby.
Ah, we're missing Tammy.
Lyle Jepson.
Here.
Tom Lovett.
Here.
Gabrielle Lucci. Jenna O'Farrell.
Here.
Oliver Olson.
Here.
Annalita Pena.
Here.
Jennifer Samuelson.
Here.
Secretary French.
Morning.
Okay. And let's go back to Patrick.
And Patrick Brown.
You're still on mute, Patrick. I think it's the mute on your Teams, not on your headset. Should be the little microphone icon at the top right-hand corner of the Teams app. While Patrick's working through that, I did receive a text message from Don Tinney. He indicates that the ID is not working for the call-in for Teams. So before we go any further with this meeting, if there are members of the public who are trying to get in and they can't, I'm a little concerned about that.
Okay, thank you. Let me see if I can get that link up so that people can join that way.
Yeah. Can you, yeah, if you can check and see maybe where the...
Well, I can tell Patrick has called in, so I know that it worked for him.
Okay.
But let me see if I can get that up.
Yeah, I'm just going to put myself on mute and call Mr. Tinney back and figure out where he's getting this information from. And here comes Tammy.
Thank you.
Suzanne?
Yes.
Were you able to sort of make any progress here?
I'm about to add the link right now.
Okay. I'm just going to try dialing the number myself and see what happens.
Welcome to the audio conferencing center. Sorry, I can't find a meeting with that number. Try entering your conference ID again.
Yeah, I just confirmed, Suzanne, that ID number does not work.
Okay, thank you. I'm getting the link up now. I think it should be there.
Yeah. I'm a little, Emily, are you with us?
I am.
You probably know what my next question is going to be.
I'm reaching for my green book, so ask it slowly.
So I am hesitant to proceed with the meeting if the means of access that's been published to the public does not allow them to access the meeting. And if we correct it here sort of contemporaneously,
So Oliver, you, just to confirm, you used the information on the top right corner of today's agenda?
Yep. Yep.
Yeah.
Oliver, I was able to, this is Dan, I was able to call in with the information I have on my calendar invitation. I'm going to post that to the chat here.
Yeah. I called in using the number on the actual paper agenda, which is what's out there in the public domain.
So Oliver, I would suggest
I see the problem. I see yeah, there's a difference. You have the correct number that you just posted, Dan. But the number on the agenda is incorrect.
Got it.
That's the source of the problem.
So Oliver, I think the remedy is to repost the agenda. We know that all members of the public access the agenda via the internet, right, as a live document online rather than as a paper copy. So I think Suzanne is, with enough time, able to update the document that is the agenda online with the corrected information. So it's really a timing question. How many minutes do we need to do that? And how many minutes do we need for members of the public to access that new information?
Yeah. Yeah. And what's your legal opinion?
That if you update that agenda so that any member of the public who is using the agenda finds it online with the corrected information, you've cured the, unintentional error in where to call in. The most important thing is that you've given notice that calling in is the method and that folks should be alerted to that method of accessing the meeting. Okay.
So if Suzanne reposts the agenda, and it's in both places, Suzanne, so I just want to make sure it's on the actual paper agenda has the incorrect information, and also on the web page.
Gotcha.
When you land on that.
I'll get that right now. Thank you.
So if we amend this to perhaps start at 9 o'clock, that gives Suzanne time to make the corrections and sufficient time for the public to find the correct information. Does that sound appropriate?
Sure.
I'm sorry, Emily?
Yeah, sounds appropriate to me, Oliver.
Okay. So we will stop the meeting now, and we will formally convene the meeting at 9 a.m. after the correct information is posted.
Chair Olson?
Yes.
Oh, I just wanted to be sure you could hear me. I'm coming
Yes,
through.
now we
Okay,
can hear
fine.
you. Yes.
Thank you, thank you, thank you.
All righty. Thank you. We will see you all in about 15 minutes. All righty. So it is 9 o'clock. We're going to do this all over again. So, and I want to, a couple of things. First of all, I want to thank Don Tinney for alerting me to the fact that we had a small glitch, which we have now cured. Couple of things. I have some family medical issues that are quite rather acute that I've been dealing with. I do plan to chair the meeting. There's a chance I may need to be pulled away. I've sort of prepped Vice Chair Jen Samuelson to help to take over if that happens. So just if I have to step away immediately, there's I didn't want that to come as a surprise. So we do have a few non-board members with us today. I'm going to ask if you're not a member of the board, if you could turn your camera off. It just eliminates confusion for other members of the public, so people are clear about who's actually a member of the board. You're welcome if we do have time for public to be heard. So when we get to that agenda item and you're a member of the public wishes to speak and you're joining us via Teams, you're welcome to turn your camera on. That would actually be preferable if you're online. But then while you're not addressing the board, if you wouldn't mind turning your camera off just to minimize confusion. So with that, it is 9:02. I'm going to call State Board of Education meeting to order. I do want to apologize for the confusion to members of the public. What we will do, we will proceed with the meeting starting here at 9 o'clock rather than the appointed time at 8:30. Suzanne and the wonderful staff at the agency have corrected the agenda and the website, provided the correct call-in information, which again, just to acknowledge, we had the wrong dial-in information. So for the benefit of the public who wanted to address the board, we thought it was important to hold off on starting the meeting until we had corrected that. Additionally, I think just in the abundance of caution at our next meeting, I will probably place on the agenda an item to formally sort of ratify any business that was transacted at this meeting, just to avoid any concerns about our adherence to the open meeting law. So with that, I brought the meeting to order. Gone through some preliminaries. I'm going to ask Suzanne to call the roll to check in all our board members, and then we're going to proceed to amendments to the agenda. So Suzanne, please call the roll.
Yes. Patrick Brown.
Present.
Kim Gleason.
Yes, here.
Tammy Colby.
Here. I'm present.
Lyle Jepson.
Present.
Tom Lovett.
Present.
Gabrielle Lucci.
Here.
Jenna O'Farrell.
Here.
Oliver Olson.
Present.
Angelita Pena.
Here.
Jennifer Samuelson.
Here.
And Secretary French.
Here.
Okay. Wonderful. Thank you, Suzanne. So under amendments to the agenda, I did connect with Kathy Lavoie. She has a conflict, so she's not going to be able to join us today. So we're going to move that to our meeting in November. But in its place, I'm going to ask for a motion to amend the agenda to replace item L with a discussion of correspondence we've received from the Ripton School District, which was distributed to members yesterday. So is there a motion to that effect?
I'll move.
Okay, it's been moved by Ms. Samuelson. Is there a second?
Second.
It's been seconded by Kim Gleason. So the motion, just to be clear, the motion is to amend the agenda to replace item L, recognition of Kathy Lavoie, with a discussion and potential response to the correspondence we've received from the Ripton School District. Is there any discussion? Alrighty, all those in favor of the motion, please signify by raising your hand and saying yes.
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 Okay, those opposed, please raise your hand and signify by saying no. Are there any abstentions? Alrighty, the motion appears to pass unanimously. Motion has passed unanimously, and you've amended the agenda. So next up on the agenda is item B, which is public to be heard. So our custom and practice is that we defer to members of the public who wish to address an item on the agenda first to give them priority, and then any other comments pertinent to our roles and responsibilities from other members of the public. So I'm going to ask first if there are members of the public who wish to address the board, if you could just identify yourself and the topic you wish to speak on. And then I want to get a sense of how many members of the public we have, and we'll allocate time based on the number of folks who want to present to the board. So with that, Suzanne, if you could make sure that our guests are unmuted so they can identify themselves.
Oliver, I can't unmute people. They're going to have to unmute themselves.
But they have the ability to unmute themselves.
Yes, they do.
Good. Okay. So members of the public wishing to address the board?
Don Tenney, addressing future agenda and work plan, I guess, on your agenda. Thanks.
Okay. Any other members of the public? Okay. So with that, Mr. Tenney, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Does that mean I have the entire public to be heard time? Is that what
It actually does.
Good morning. I'm Don Tenney, a 31-year veteran English teacher from South Hero, currently serving as president of Vermont NEA, representing 13,000 educators across the state. I know you have a busy meeting planned and have a little shortened period of time, so I appreciate the opportunity to speak with you, and will keep my remarks brief. The brevity of my statement, however, does not reflect the gravity of the multiple issues our educators face today. A lesson we have learned from the pandemic is that our public schools are an extension of the state's healthcare system. During COVID, they have been an integral part of that system for our children and youth. Our school nurses have worked tirelessly to provide services and support to students throughout the pandemic and need to be further supported by the Department of Health, community-based healthcare providers, and other state and local agencies. As one teacher said in a meeting last week, yes, I'm busy and stressed this year, but I'm really worried about our school nurse. She is simply overwhelmed. As you discuss policy decisions over the next year, we ask that you explore ways to make sure that our public schools are seen as communities of healing, not just academic institutions, and that we have policies and rules that promote cooperation amongst healthcare providers, agencies, and schools. This, of course, includes the important area of mental health. The social and emotional well-being of our students and staff must be a top priority this year and every year. Focusing on the well-being of every student allows educators to create a safe, secure, and inclusive school. In a recent training on behavioral threat assessment in Vermont, a retired Secret Service agent, and a retired NCIS officer made it clear that enhancing a school's climate enhances school safety. Every school must be a sanctuary for every student. So please examine our state policies to assure that they prioritize the well-being of our students and the quality of school climate. One of the serious challenges to maintaining a healthy school climate has been the personnel shortages our schools are experiencing. The pandemic has exacerbated the workforce shortages that have been identified in recent years. It is a long-term problem that must be addressed long after the virus has been mitigated. While we often see the term teacher shortage in the headlines, the shortages include school bus drivers, paraeducators, custodial and maintenance staff, nurses, counselors, administrators, food service workers, and every job classification in education. As you debate the critical issues facing public education today, please take a moment to look through the lens of workforce development. So thank you for your attention this morning, and thank you for your commitment to public education, the cornerstone of democracy in America. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you so much for that statement, and thank you again for your patience as we persevered through our meeting challenges this morning. So I appreciate that. Excellent. Are there any other members of the public who wish to address the board? Yeah, okay. With that, we will turn to the consent agenda. Is there a motion to bring that to the floor?
I'll move.
Okay. It's been moved by Ms. Samuelson. Is there a second? It's been seconded by Mr. Jepson. Is there any discussion? Yes.
Yes, on the minutes of our last meeting on page 3, I think there's a small correction. It's under item J, second paragraph, 4th line down. I believe that the recommendation was to make Ripton its own supervisory district. It's written as supervisory union, and I think it just needs to be corrected, that one word.
Yes, that's correct. Okay. Any other comments or discussion on that? Otherwise, oh, sorry, go ahead, Jenna.
I don't know, for process sake, if I would abstain from voting on the consent agenda, because I actually am the supervisor of the 3rd acknowledgement of the closure of the teen parent education program.
Okay.
No.
I think that works. So I think what I'm hearing is that we're looking to approve the motion.
Can I just ask one question, Oliver?
Yes, go ahead, Kim. Yes.
And I think it's on Jennifer's. I was trying to find the tab that I had the minutes up in. Yes, I think they would be their own supervisory district. They would not then be assigned to a supervisory union. So
correct.
That's how I understood it. And so yes, they won't become their own supervisory union, but they will also not be assigned to others, where SUs would have multiple SDs within them. You know,
well,
I'm not sure.
We have school district, and then school districts are either a member of a supervisory union or they are considered a supervisory district. So they're essentially a supervisory union and a school district as one entity. And I think the proper term of art is supervisory district, and that's what that was the point that Jennifer was making. Yeah. So I
Got
think
it.
we're all on
I
the same
just
page. I
wanted
think we're all
to-
saying the same thing.
Okay, perfect.
Yes.
Supervisory district takes care of that for me. Thank you.
Yes. So I'm going to suggest just sort of Jennifer, perhaps if you would accept as a friendly amendment to your original motion to adopt the consent agenda with that minor correction that we've noted to the minutes.
Wait, what is the minor correction? Just switching the word?
Switching the word, yep.
Yeah. Yes.
Okay. Are there any objections to that? Okay, so I'm going to restate the motion as to adopt the consent agenda with the correction to the minutes to reflect supervisory district rather than supervisory union. Okay. Any further discussion? Okay, all those in favor, please raise your hand and signify by saying yes.
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 Okay.
Yes.
Those opposed, raise your hand and indicate by saying no. And abstentions? One abstention from Jenna O'Farrell. Okay. That now brings us to item D, board announcements.
Oliver,
Yes.
Oliver, this is Emily. I'm so sorry. When all of you attend by electronic means, any vote that's not unanimous should be taken by roll call.
I'm sorry, say that again?
The rules for open meetings in which all members of the public body attend electronically or a
Yes.
quorum or more require that any non-unanimous vote is taken by call of the roll.
Thank you for that. So with that, Suzanne, would you mind taking the roll? As Suzanne calls your name, please indicate whether by saying yes if you are approving the adoption of the consent agenda with the correction that we noted, or no if you do not approve, or indicate that you're abstaining if you are abstaining. So Suzanne, please call the roll.
Yes, sir. Kim Gleason,
Yes, sorry.
Lyle Jepson,
Yes.
Jenna O'Farrell,
Abstaining.
Jennifer Samuelson,
Yes.
Patrick Brown,
Yes.
Tom Lovett,
Yes.
Angelita Pena,
Yes.
Tammy Colby,
Yes.
Oliver Olson. Will you be voting?
Yes. Yes.
And the vote passes.
Okay, great. Thank you. And thank you, Emily, for that, keeping us on task. All righty. Next item, D, board announcements. Okay. Not hearing any. We'll proceed to the student report. So Angelita and Gabrielle.
Yes. Hello, everyone. So we have been in school for quite a while now, and I know at the meeting when school first started, I said it was very easygoing. That is not really the case anymore. Kids and teachers are kind of taking a hit right now. It has been pretty stressful, and I'm not really positive if it's because we took so long and our schedule was so much different, and now we weren't really given time to recuperate and get in the groove again. We were just kind of told this is how it's going to be, and we were expected to get right back into it after our COVID year. And it has been quite stressful, and I guess I'm not positive just because obviously I'm a junior and it's just going to get harder, or if this is a big reflection on how this has always been or if it's because we're coming back. But either way, it's not very pleasant. Kids have felt that they can't really miss school. I know some friends that have come into school sick because we know for a fact, and I've missed a day before, where if you miss a day, you're going to have a very hard time getting back on track. I missed a day, and it took me like a week or two to finally bounce back from the work and just the overall stress. And when you're stressed out from school, it's very hard to kind of bounce back. Teachers have also said that this year has felt harder than last year, just because all those kids came back at once, and and all these kind of behaviors have come back with no regulation last year. It's kind of hard to tell kids and get kids in a routine when they didn't have one last year at all. And it's just been it's been a struggle a little bit. Just overall work has been heavy. And if this is how it's been the entire time, it's kind of a problem, especially for kids with mental health. For me, I can easily say, and I can vouch for a lot of kids, it has raised a lot of anxiety and depression and such, and just mental health problems. And, you're not going to get a good kind of ranking of where your students are if we're all stressed and struggling. So that is just my update. And teachers are also going to be struggling, which obviously tempers can rise, and that can just be a really big conflict. So that's my update.
Okay, great. Gabrielle, would you like to add anything to that?
Yes, our school has been experiencing some challenges that the faculty and administration is dealing with right now. I think that, like Angelita said, we're kind of a little stressed out around this sort of time. I can say that I've missed a few days of school, and I'm already starting to feel stressed as the work seems to be piling up. And a lot of this work I can't do until I get fully back in the building. So it's kind of starting to build up, which is definitely a little stressful and can kind of affect your mood negatively and your outlook on how you're going to be able to complete that work. So that's definitely been a problem. And I know that others have experienced that. And I know that kids have come into school still sick and not fully recovered, which is a little concerning. But something positive that's happened is that we've formed a few new clubs, and all the clubs are back in session, and it seems that kids are really enthusiastic to be back in that now that they're back in person. So that's something that's really nice to see. That's my update.
That's great. Lyle, I think I saw your hand up.
Yes, thank you. And thank you for the reports, both of you, and to Mr. Tinney. I think perhaps Secretary French will have some recommendations for us later, or thoughts on what schools could or should be doing. And now might not be the time to brainstorm those things, but it would be great to get something in writing that would say, if we did this, this would make it better. I think moving forward, I don't think this issue is going to go away. And so I wonder if we can begin to have things kind of written down so that we can get it to the right source, and maybe Secretary French will let us know what that right source is. So thank you, Mr. Tinney and Gabrielle and Angelita, for bringing this up.
Kim.
Thank you. I was just thinking as well, while we may not be the right place for brainstorming solutions, it may be important for us to think about if we have a place in a statement acknowledging these challenges in education right now for all involved. I think education in many venues is taking hits from all directions, and it may be important to consider whether we have a place in offering a statement around the challenges with, in my and my feeling anyway, a depth of gratitude for those who are doing this every day.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more, Kim. And what I'm going to suggest is when we do get to the item P, I'd like to talk about something we could put on our November agenda to have some further discussion and a more robust discussion about this, and perhaps invite some folks to be part of that discussion. Angelita.
Yes, I'm sorry. Is it all right if I send you guys an article? There has been an incident at one of our schools in our district that has really taken a very brutal hit in child behavior and just the difficulty with what has happened. And I don't know what happens in your guys' district, but I think it would be interesting just for you guys to see kind of what happens in my district with one specific school. I'm not saying it happens to all, but then, I feel like when you hear about it, then it's easier to see it happening in other places. So just, I don't know, just to send it out, you guys can just take a quick look just to see what's going on and just that would stuff like that.
That'd be wonderful. If you wouldn't mind sending that out, that would be great. Jen.
Is this the article that was in Vermont Digger a couple of days ago?
I don't know. It was in the Addison County one.
Okay.
Bristol. Bristol Middle.
Yes.
VES. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Have you guys heard about it yet?
We have. I saw the article, and there was an article in Vermont Digger and a story on WCAX. I've not seen the Addison County Independent story, so if you wouldn't mind sending us that one, that would be wonderful. Yeah, I'm sure it won't be that much different, but I just thought, once you hear about it, then it's easier to see it around you.
Thank you.
Okay. Anything else on the student report? Otherwise, I'm just going to back up a little bit and go back to item D, because in the confusion with the start of our meeting, I did have something I wanted to address in item D. And that is, I just want to take a moment to acknowledge Vermont's Teacher of the Year, Karen McCalla of Mill River Union High School. So as you guys remember, we had 3 wonderful finalists present to the board. And they all, I think, were really inspiring in their presentations. But I was really pleased to see Karen designated as the Vermont Teacher of the Year, and looking forward to her representing Vermont as she's a contender for the National Teacher of the Year. So anyway, I want to thank Secretary French and the staff at the agency who helped move that process forward, and in light of the challenges that our educators are facing, throughout the system, as alluded to by our student members and Mr. Tinney, I think it's really important, and this is one really important way of recognizing the tremendous efforts of our educators. So congratulations to Vermont's newest Teacher of the Year. So with that, we're on to item F. We're starting to catch up a little bit of time here, and that's an update on career and technical education. As you remember, at an earlier meeting, we had a few board members who expressed interest in getting an update on this particular topic. So, Secretary French, you have someone who will be addressing the board on this?
Yes, good morning. There's some information in your packet, and I believe we have Ruth Durkee, who's our State Director of CT, on the line. Ruth, good morning. I see your name there. Would you like to introduce yourself?
Good morning. Thank you, Secretary French. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Ruth Durkee. I'm the State Director of Career Technical Education. I've been in this position since April 2020. So I do now know where my desk is at the Agency of Education, but I think I worked at the agency for about a year before I knew that. So I have worked in Vermont's career technical education system since 1999. I actually started at what was then the Vermont Department of Education. working on the career technical education team and doing civil rights compliance reviews in technical centers, among other things. And then I left the Department of Education in 2004 and went to work first for 11 years at the Randolph Technical Career Center, and then for 3.5 years at Central Vermont Career Center. So I'm pleased to be back at the Agency of Education and in this role where I can provide support for and help strengthen Vermont's career technical education system doing the work that I do now. So it's a pleasure to be with you this morning. I want to say that Jay Ramsey's also here. Jay was the State Director of Career Technical Education until I took on this role, and he is the Assistant Director of the Student Pathways Division. So he's here as well and is available if there are questions that you have for us that he is better prepared to discuss than I am. So we're both here for you. Career technical education in Vermont is delivered through 17 regional career technical education centers. 12 of those reside within school districts or supervisory unions. 3 are independent regional technical center school districts, and 2 operate in private schools at St. Johnsbury Academy and Linden Institute. So I was asked to provide an update on how career technical education has fared during the pandemic, and I did prepare materials for you that were sent in September and that you have available. But what I can tell you as an overall piece is that technical centers have approached the past 18 months with creativity and determination, and they have done some impressive things since the start of the pandemic under far from ideal conditions. Centers say that last year was hard, we know that, but they also report that this year is proving to be just as or even more difficult for many of the reasons that I think Mr. Tinney, Angelita, and Gabrielle alluded to. So center directors tell me that while last year's schedules were primarily rooted in hybrid scheduling and the challenge of having students with them only for part of the time in person, which is a challenge for many of the technical proficiencies we want students to master while they're in career technical education, this year's challenges are rooted in responding to the pandemic's impact on students' well-being. And so, Angelita, to answer your question, what people who've been in this work tell me, and they've been doing this for 20 years, and this year is not normal. So, so it is harder, and you're right to see that and to feel that. Centers report having to address student well-being needs they haven't confronted before, responding to challenging behaviors they have never seen before, and just worrying about their students' overall well-being and sense of trauma from what's happened in the past 18 months. So Governor's Emergency Education Relief Funds, or otherwise known as GEAR funds, really helped centers provide quality career technical education last year while operating in a hybrid delivery mode. And those funds made a huge difference in what centers could do to ensure that they could provide quality career technical education when students were only in person often half of the time for their learning. And in the memo that I provided to you, I gave a summary of some of the creative things that centers did with those funds. And they had really great impact on students' learning last year and really helped teachers feel that they could provide what their students needed. The one thing is, however, that less in-person time with students last year led to fewer students attaining post-secondary credentials and fewer students completing all of their program's technical proficiencies. So centers are really working this year to help offset those shortfalls from last year. Some centers have invited students who graduated back to continue working toward a credential that they were not able to receive last year. In June, Career Technical Education Centers submitted their own recovery plans to the CTE team at the Agency of Education, and centers were asked to address how they would coordinate with their sending high schools to ensure that students' needs were identified and supports were coordinated in 3 areas: students' well-being, mental health, and social emotional learning, students' engagement and attendance, and students' academic progress. And I shared with you in the materials for the meeting highlights from those plans, including excellent practices that centers have put into place, as well as common needs and challenges that they've identified. Career technical education centers are unique in that half or more of their students are new each year. So we have asked centers to update their recovery plans by October 29th to reflect any needs they have now identified that they had not anticipated they would have in June. So I'll be interested to see what we learn when we get that newest information. This year's challenges also include for some centers shortages in staffing and/or a lack of financial resources to meet all of the identified needs. Another challenge that is not captured in the materials I prepared for you is teacher turnover. This fall, there are 36 teachers in the Teaching Methods 1 course for new career technical education teachers, which is more than double, I think, what we've ever had as a number in that cohort before. So, and in addition, at least 6 centers have started this year without having been able to fill key teaching or school counseling positions. So they're really struggling to provide what they need to with just a shortage of qualified employees available, or with people who are brand new to teaching, learning to teach during a less than normal school year. At this point in time, I'd love to have you ask me what you want to know most about. So I'm here to answer any questions you have or to provide more information about anything you're wondering about.
Board members? Jennifer, and then Lyle.
Yeah. First of all, thank you so much for this presentation, because it's really helpful to kind of understand, one of the pathways for, our students as they continue beyond high school, and not something that I had known a whole lot about. So I really appreciate this overview. I'm curious if any of the federal or state COVID funds have been available to you, and if so, if that's kind of helping to alleviate some of the issues that you're experiencing.
So I think last year the funds were fully available, and the GEAR funds that were available, thanks to Governor Scott's allocation of those to career technical education, meant that centers were financially very well positioned. The challenge we have with ESSER funding that schools are accessing this year is that the funding by federal law has to go to LEAs, to school districts and supervisory unions. And then within those school districts and supervisory unions, there's a decision made as to how to allocate or not allocate those to the regional technical center that they host. So I can tell you that 6 centers so far are receiving or will receive ESSER funds that their host district is allocating to help meet their needs, but that at least 5 centers of the 12 that are hosted by school districts have reported that they have been told not to anticipate receiving any of those funds. And then we have the 3 regional technical center school districts who are ineligible under the law to receive those funds directly. So Secretary French wrote a very helpful memo that clarified the intent that those funds would be allocated in ways that represented the need, that reflected the needs of career technical education centers. But we are seeing a difference around the state and where that is working well and where that remains a challenge. Secretary French, do you want to add to that?
Yeah, I think, the funding piece, ESSER is the primary source of funding. As Ruth mentioned, that's essentially targeted at school districts. So to the extent that some CT centers were able to benefit from that, whereas others did not, is uneven across the state. And then this other pot of money, which is much smaller, the GEAR funds, GEAR 1, the governors have some discretion in how to allocate those funds. GEAR 1 was allocated to CTE. GEAR 2 has not been allocated yet, but I'm thinking that the governor is going to be inclined to focus on CTE again. Again, they're an entity that hasn't necessarily benefited directly from ESSER funding. So funding is an important part of the response, but per the comments we heard both from Don and the students, it's a complex environment right now. Not necessarily one where funding's a barrier, but I would say CT centers are feeling the pinch on the funding side a bit, particularly as we plan for the future and responding to the pandemic.
Lyle and then Tom.
Thank you. Well, first, I probably don't need to let everyone know my passion for CTE and the fact that Ruth Durkee and Jay Ramsey are driving the train for CTE. We should all feel very comfortable. They have great passion themselves, and specifically supporting teaching and learning in CTE centers. So I want to thank Ruth and Jay for the work that you do. I think double the number of new teachers in CTE is problematic. Having been in the Career and Technical Teacher Education program, overseeing that for a couple of years, it's difficult to find teachers, period, as Don Tinney told us. But finding CTE teachers is even more difficult. We're encouraging people to leave their industry where they probably are making more money to go into education, which you have to have the passion for, not necessarily looking to win the megabucks. Two questions for Ruth and or Jay or Dan. It's it's an unusual year for Burlington Tech Center in that they are spread all over the city. And I don't know, one, this is my first question. One, is there a plan to support Burlington Tech Center as they move towards redesigning a school and building a new school? And then two, is there any effort underway to look again at Act 189 for school funding and equalizing that in a way that does not result in competition for students between high schools and tech centers? So school construction and competition are the two questions.
Secretary French, I think you might want to start on those.
Yeah, all we have are complex issues. I think, as you know, Burlington Tech Center conversation situated in a larger conversation about Burlington High School and, the district's going through an extensive planning process there. And I think, certainly the question of the tech center's programming and how it's situated in a larger region is going to be a significant concern in that planning process. I will say, and this kind of points to the agenda item on future planning, I think there are many pieces here, whether it be workforce issues, demographic issues, just the challenges within the education system and barriers and so forth, that are coalescing around energy to make CTE policy a focus of the upcoming legislative session. So we have, I think, as you identified, Lyle, some interest in looking at the funding system and some of the barriers there. That has not been looked at for a number of years. We have some work that was done by a few of the center districts, if you will, to study. Bill Talbot, you might know, was involved in that, to study different models of revising the CTE funding system. So that's something I very much would like to bring forward in the next legislative session. So I think in November, we're going to start pulling these pieces together as we contemplate the policy priorities for the next legislative session. I'm meeting with the House Ed Committee next week. But I think CTE policy, and there's several elements that will figure prominently in that policy work.
Excellent. Oh, sorry, go ahead, Ruth.
I had one other thing that I wanted to share, and that is that we have some career technical education centers that are struggling with a drop in enrollment due to the pandemic. And the way career technical education is funded is based on a 6-semester rolling average of enrollments. And so I've heard from approximately 5 to 6 centers who are really struggling because last year their enrollment dropped due to hybrid scheduling, due to families choosing not to have their child attend schools in 2 different districts, due to a variety of things. And so that drop in enrollment last year has impacts over 3 full years in terms of how funding is calculated. And then we've had some centers who have faced lower enrollment this year in certain program areas, due in large part because recruitment had to be different for this school year than in the past. And so students were not able to visit in the same ways, and students didn't make decisions in some of the same ways. And so that's a struggle for, as I said, about 1/3 of our centers. And so I just want to acknowledge that. And again, that's where longer term, the strategies that Secretary French was talking to, ultimately, how do we look at our career technical education funding system to help strengthen it to address multiple challenges that we currently face?
Okay. Great. So we're going to go to Tom, Tammy, and then back again to Lyle. Tom Lovett, you might be on mute. If you're speaking, Tom, we can't hear you. All righty, we're going to pass over Tom for the moment. We'll come back to you, Tom. Tammy.
Thank you. And thank you, Ruth, for the update. That was really helpful. You actually hit right on one of my questions at the end. And so I just want to sort of put a point on that, this issue around the funding and sort of the look back period for how funding works. Because my question was, to what extent have CTEs been impacted by this flux in student enrollments with respect to funding, right? So when you have this 6th semester rollback, and it sounds like that is a serious consideration. And I would think that also would be a consideration going forward, because we're going to see more flux in enrollment due to teacher shortages and program enrollments and things along those lines. So I really appreciate that point. Is there any other context around that you can provide us?
What I can say is it's interesting because a third of the centers did experience drops in enrollment last year and or are experiencing this year. So we do have that longer term impact. And Lyle's point that the money follows the student is also a longer term pre-pandemic issue. So that for those of you who are, I won't give you the full explanation of career technical education funding. It would far exceed the time we have available to us. But basically, career technical education funding is based on a model so that yes, the funding does follow the student in a way that can create a challenge for sending districts when they see that they may lose financial revenue by supporting a student's access to career technical education. So while we have strong legal statements in our statutes and state board rules that say that we want to guarantee access to students to career technical education, in reality, that's proven a challenge pre-pandemic, and it was only further heightened by the pandemic. I think it brought to light challenges that were already there. I will say that full-time career technical education centers have not seen the same challenges with enrollment as half-day centers. So we have two different delivery models in Vermont. Some students attend the career technical education center all day. Others attend for half their day. And I think the centers with half-day models suffered more during the pandemic, often because it was then students gathering from multiple schools and families, students, and others making the decision that that wasn't in the student's best health interests in ways that prevented full access to career technical education. And those centers that were most impacted by that are still struggling and feeling that struggle this year. And I know they've been in touch with Secretary French about those challenges and continue to have those conversations. I also think that we have seen in some CTE centers in some program areas an increase in student interest. One of the things I'm hearing is that students and their families looked at what jobs were secure during the pandemic. And so there have been increases in applications to electrical, plumbing, construction trades programs, health sciences programs. So some programs have actually seen more applicants, but again, those trends often tend to be in full day centers as well, where students, I think, are looking for that stability of knowing that if they make that decision, they'll have access to in-person learning and they won't have to juggle those two pieces. Whether after this year, we'll go back to that stabilizing for half-day centers is my hope, but we don't know yet.
Thank you, Ruth. And to Secretary French, I'm really encouraged to hear that this is going to be a focus of this legislative session. You know as well as I do from the weighting study that some of these issues came up there as well around the competition for resources and sort of the smoothing out of average enrollments and all as well. So thank you, Ruth, and thank you, Secretary.
Jay Ramsey, did you have something you wanted to add?
Yes. Thank you, Jay Ramsey. I've been mentioned a few times, Assistant Director of the Student Pathways Division, and I help lead and support the CTE teams and the Adult Education and Literacy teams. And I just want to build off of what Ruth just said. And for additional context here, we're talking about funding, but it's also in the context of a declining student population, which isn't something that is new information to anyone. And so what I said to the directors is there are fewer students in your buildings because there are fewer students to be in your buildings, but that's one part of the conversation. I think the other part of the conversation that I'm trying to bring in here is around career counseling. So what is it that high schools are doing? What is it that middle schools are doing to counsel students about career choices and options, and where can students, if they're interested in a particular career, say in manufacturing, how could they realize that interest by going to the technical center. And we've surveyed in February school counselors across the state and are working through the results there. But during the pandemic, they sort of reported to us that they have there's less time for them to focus on career counseling because they are focused on mental health and supporting students with much greater needs than there were in the past. And so in the context of technical education, there I think are multiple other factors that we need to also consider, and career counseling is one of those.
And just to follow up on that, I think there's that also piece of the fact that students don't know what career choices are, and counselors have expressed that information that this may not be an area that their training has well provided them. Just as a student may not know what is involved in a manufacturing career, a counselor may not know. And so I do think we have a couple of career technical education centers that are really planning to pilot some innovative ways of reaching younger students, but those efforts need to become more consistent statewide as well. So, and really, how do you provide those hands-on career exploration activities to tie into career counseling activities, and how is that responsibility shared throughout our education system? All questions we need to keep working on.
Great. So I did get a message from Tom Lovett a moment ago. He's experiencing internet problems, so he's trying to work through those issues, and hopefully will be rejoining us. But I know, Lyle, you were sort of next up on the list for some additional questions.
Yes, thank you. And I'm sure that the conversations at the legislative level will include business and industry leaders and their input. I think that's critical. I think we all know when we drive around, we're seeing help wanted signs everywhere. And many of those help wanted signs are in the skill areas that career and technical education helps with training. And I think it's even more critical now when we look at the numbers, and Ruth and Jay can probably correct me, but if 45 or 50 or 55% of our students are not going on to higher education and completing that higher education, what are they doing? And how do we get more students involved in career and technical education so that they can learn some things that they have never experienced before? So I would encourage us to really focus on the financial competition piece. And if we can eliminate, and I will probably overstate this, but it's because of my years of experience, but if we can eliminate the financial competition between high schools and tech centers, we will have a more equitable opportunity for students to have school choice. Because right now they may not always be getting information, not by neglect, but they may not always be hearing about the things and experiencing things that they need to hear about and experience so they know what they'd like to do in the future. So any way we can eliminate financial competition and kind of level that playing field would be fabulous.
And Lyle, just to follow up on that, not only do students who access career technical education have the opportunity to leave high school with those post-secondary industry recognized credentials that lead to higher wages and to pathway to employment, but I also know from my years of working in career technical education that students who weren't planning to pursue post-secondary education change their mind when they're in career technical education. We have strong opportunities for students to earn college credits for their work that they do in their CTE programs. And we also provide them with assessment that shows their academic readiness for college. And the number of times I was able to talk to students who had not had that thought of themselves of going on to college, and to really sit down and talk to them about their strengths and their interests, and to help them explore that pathway, and then to help them get 3 to 6 to 9 credits while they were in high school, made a huge difference in how I think many students did continue on. So I also see that opportunity needs to be available to more students in Vermont.
And Oliver, if I may, I know that this is also a very general statement, but the students in my experience who go to CTE stay in Vermont. They are our future voters, our taxpayers, and we owe it to them to level the playing field.
Chair Olson, can I ask a question, please?
Yes, go for it.
Yes, Ruth, what's the level of interest you find from the New American community in CTE, especially in Chittenden County?
That's an excellent question. I had the opportunity before the pandemic to spend significant time at both the Center for Technology in Essex and the Burlington Technical Center, both of which have serve a large number of new American students. And I would say that we saw good representation in particularly all programs at the Center for Technology Essex, and they had certainly seen an expansion in the number of new Americans who were taking advantages of the programs there. When it came to Burlington Technical Center in 2019, they too were serving a significant number of new American students. Our concern at that point in time that they've been working to address is, I think that it goes back to some of the career counseling, the career advising, and also some of just the support systems that students face. But students at Burlington at that point in time tended to congregate in certain programs within the Career Center and not fully, were not as fully represented in all programs that Burlington Technical Center had to offer. So while they were certainly taking advantage of Burlington Technical Center, teachers expressed concern that there was career advising and counseling happening before students got to the center that was encouraging students into certain program areas, maybe not based fully on student choice, but based on other factors. So that's something I know Burlington has been working on, and they have an excellent team there.
Okay, there we go.
Excellent team there to help continue to work on that. But I think that Essex, I know, has added a second teacher to support English learners, and so they have just seen an exponential growth in the students taking advantage of that opportunity.
Thank you.
Great. Tom, you may be back now. Tom Lovett, I saw he did make it back in, but he may have left again. Okay. Wonderful. Any other questions for Ruth or Jay? Okay, wonderful. Well, thank you so much for this excellent presentation and for answering our questions. We really appreciate it.
Thank you for inviting us.
Thank you.
Excellent. So that brings us to, we're actually sort of back on schedule now. So that brings us to item G, which is the waiver request from the Secretary of Education. So, Mr. Secretary.
Yes, good morning again. So in your packets, you have a recommendation from me on this issue of the waiver process. This pertains to the mandatory number of student days. I'm bringing this forward again. The board had given me this approval prior times during the pandemic. Essentially, under regulation, these waiver requests would come to the board, and what I'm recommending is that the board grant me the authority to process those waivers. Slight difference from what I brought forward before. Previously, I capped that recommendation on granting me authority to grant waivers no more than 10 days. This time I'm leaving that open, so we'll be able to have a little more flexibility to address what's happened this fall, which the pattern of which is still uncertain. But if we have any questions, I believe Emily Simmons is also on the line here that we could respond to.
Okay. So let's start by just getting this getting this on the floor. So would somebody care to offer a motion to adopt the Secretary's recommendation?
I would move that we adopt the Secretary's recommendation.
Okay, is there a second?
I second it, Patrick.
Okay, it's been moved and seconded to adopt the Secretary's recommendation, which is in the item G packet, consists of the two items indicated there. So with that, we'll open up for discussion. I see Kim, you have your hand up. Kim, you appear to be frozen. Can you hear us? You might be on mute.
Hi.
You're good now.
I can hear you now. I don't know what happened.
Okay.
I don't know if it's a Teams thing or a me thing or anyway, I was going to second, but you guys might have taken care of that.
Okay. just so as the secretary indicated, we did this last year, and obviously given everything happening with COVID, things evolve fairly quickly. We as a board only meet once a month, so at the time we felt it was the responsible thing to do was to provide the secretary some flexibility and agility to respond to rapidly evolving conditions. I think, unfortunately, the rapidly changing nature of the pandemic is still with us. I am personally supportive of this, but curious if there are any other thoughts or concerns. Okay. Kim, your hand is still up. I don't know if that. Oh, you want to say something?
I just wanted to. I definitely support the. I don't see that the state board adds value in those conversations, and I think school districts will appreciate the ability to have a response more quickly than would be the case in a monthly meeting. I also think I am interested in hearing and understanding better to what extent remote learning can be counted. This year, I know that last year that was fine. And I think schools are even better equipped this year to potentially be able to pivot if they've got either COVID or staffing concerns that prevent them from being open. And I'm wondering if that's something maybe Dan can speak to, or I'm not sure whom.
Yeah, the issue, the comparison between last year and this year is a good one. Last year under the state of emergency, we were able to essentially provide some flexibility in terms of defining the attendance of students. And we came up with some innovative ways to do that during remote learning. Absent a state of emergency, this year we're not in a state of emergency. We fall back on our existing regulations that really don't speak to the issue of remote learning counting towards attendance. So what's mentioned in today's packet item is the attendance standard, which is that 50% of the students must be present. And this is the standard for schools. Okay, so what we're talking about is a school offering a certain number of instructional days during the school year as defined by over 50% of the students being physically present on any given day. So we have some things happening in the landscape in terms of remote learning right now. We've had quarantining, some cases where schools have gone over that 50% threshold. In many cases, they have not, but student learning has been disrupted. So it's, the point of bringing forward this recommendation now is to work within our current regulatory framework of the 50% attendance standard to provide me some, I'll say, tactical flexibility to respond to these waiver requests, which no doubt will come forward. But that process under our current regulation doesn't start till the second half of the year. So at any rate, don't have the authority, and our regulations don't provide the same kind of authority to count remote learning as an attendance day per se. And that's the landscape we're operating in. But it's not clear to me yet what the pattern will be beyond this initial opening of school, and to what extent we'll see more remote learning needed as a result of the virus quarantining process and so forth, or not.
Is there anything you would recommend that would happen that would enable, I'm even thinking outside of pandemic, the opportunity, if the day before that it's going to be a snow day and, potentially pivoting versus calling a snow day. So I guess in the category of COVID wins, is there something that we think could or should happen to capture opportunities since we've done better with remote learning?
Yeah, I think, firstly, I think we have to start thinking about policy in terms of lessons learned from the pandemic. This specific one is in law, actually, not so much regulation, but it stems from a statutory requirement on attendance. And I think, the larger policy reflections that we should be having as a state are important. I would not necessarily say that remote learning has gone well. We jumped into it last year haphazardly out of necessity, and it certainly has been enacted very unevenly on and off. So it doesn't, and to point to your observation about snow days, we did essentially encourage people to use that last year, and we found fairly consistently that people preferred to have snow days, meaning even when there was, Vermonters like to play in the snow. So I think, again, pointing to the need to have policy conversations on these issues as opposed to reacting on sort of anecdotal observation or this worked or didn't work or we like snow or we didn't like snow, because, unfortunately, that's how often we do make policy. But I think, as many themes of the conversation today, there are significant policy implications from the pandemic in education, not just in Vermont, but in every part of the world. And we should be convening those conversations soon. It's hard to do in the context of managing the pandemic at the same time, but there's some important policy implications for education as a result of the pandemic that need to be factored in. And I think, the two guiding posts for us as a state in Vermont, we focus on quality and we focus on equity, the equal access to that quality. Those should remain our guideposts. And we should be examining things like remote learning from that perspective. To what extent does it afford access to greater quality, or to what extent does it create even greater inequality? And back to the conversation on CTE, and you heard a bit from Ruth about half-day configurations versus full-day configurations. I think there's a role there for remote learning to enable students to stay in their tech centers full-time and access their academic programs remotely. So there's some things like that we should be taking a look at. But again, this conversation really needs to start with a statutory revision around attendance, and our regulations flow directly from that statutory framework. And the framework was created probably pre-1900, certainly pre-COVID, and these are things that should be put on the table, as part of the General Assembly and certainly the board. And look forward to having those conversations with everyone.
Great. Any other questions or discussion?
So, Secretary French, this is Patrick. And I think one significant part of this conversation is access. For example, students who live in areas where there's no broadband, an alternative for them, to do remote learning. And I'm sure you've taken that into consideration.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, to my point that you can't really qualify remote learning as being successful or equally accessible to everyone. I think, that's a great policy conversation to have. That's not what's on the table at this moment. What we're talking about is how to implement our current regulations and to afford maximum flexibility, I think, to the Secretary to navigate very uncertain moment in the history of the system. So I would appreciate your support for this recommendation.
Any other comments? Questions? Okay. We shall go ahead and bring this to a vote. So all those in favor of adopting the Secretary's recommendation, please signify by saying yes and raising your hand.
Yeah. Yes.
Yeah.
And those opposed, please raise your hand and indicate by saying no. Are there any abstentions? Alrighty, the motion appears to pass unanimously. The motion has carried unanimously, and you've adopted the Secretary's recommendation. So with that, that now brings us to our break. We will return at 10:30 sharp. So we're just slightly ahead of schedule now, but at 10:30, when we return, we'll hear from Jen Samuelson, who will provide an update on the work of the Independent School Rules Subcommittee. So during that time, during the break, if you wouldn't mind turning off your camera and muting your line. We will stand in recess until 10:30, and please be back sharp at 10:30. Thank you. We have folks rejoining promptly at 10:30. So we're going to restart our meeting here at agenda item H. So Jen Samuelson, I'll turn it over to you to provide an update on the Independent School Rules Subcommittee.
Great. All right. Thank you so much. So there were a couple of items in the agenda packet, some of which are going to look familiar because I basically just took what I've submitted the last meeting or two and then just updated it to keep it current. So basically, I've got 3 updates to sort of review. The first one is the update to this Rule Series 2200. Basically, that first page with the update that you have before you is really the same as what you've seen before, but I've included the dial-in information for the 3rd public comment hearing, which will be this afternoon at 4:30. And then also the dial-in information for our final public comment hearing, which will be next Tuesday at 7 p.m. Again, we've tried to sort of scatter these hearings at different days of the week and different times to try to capture as many interested members of the public who want to participate so that they are afforded ample opportunity to hopefully make at least one of these meetings. And then finally, anyone who can't make the meeting or wants to submit comments in writing may do so by emailing comments to, and I've provided the email, but it's SBE for State Board of Ed .publiccomment@vermont.gov. So that is the update with regard to 2200 as far as the public comment period goes. I'm going to circle back to it in a second. But then I also wanted to provide an update on the Rule Series 7000. And just as a recap, that rule has been opened kind of as an offshoot to the 2200 subcommittee's work, which really started with the request from ASNE to be included on the list of recognized accrediting agencies. And then that prompted the subcommittee to look at the way it's currently set up, where Rule 2223 cross-references a list that is currently located in Rule 7320, which we felt was a little bit clunky. So we have gone into Rule Series 7000. And basically what we're trying to do is move the topic of recognized accrediting agencies into the Rule 2200 series, just so it's all in one location. And then also just eliminate the rest of the Rule Series 7000 because there's no independent new information that's located in that rule. So we have currently scheduled one public comment hearing on that rule series. That will be Wednesday, December 1st from 4 to 5 p.m. Don't have the call-in information for that yet, but I expect at our next meeting I will be able to provide that. And then the third update to include is back on the Rule 2200 series. At our first public comment hearing, we received some public comment. Let me just find my notes here. Basically asking us about the fact that there's no mention of the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission's prohibition against discrimination in employment in Rule 2200 as it's currently written. So at our subcommittee meeting on September 22nd, the subcommittee spent most of the time discussing the current general state of employment law in Vermont and whether the standards are the same for public and independent schools. At that point, I then had a follow-up conversation with Peter Teachout, who is a professor of law at Vermont Law School and sort of a constitutional law guru, and invited him to our subcommittee meeting that happened this past Friday. So that is the second document that you guys have in your agenda packet, where that is the written testimony that he provided. But long story short, he sort of had 3 points that he made and that we discussed in the subcommittee meeting. The first is that the state of Vermont cannot require religious independent schools to comply with state and federal anti-discrimination laws because doing so would violate the free exercise rights of the religious schools. But there is no prohibition in current constitutional law that would preclude us from creating a rule that says that schools that fail to comply with state and federal anti-discrimination laws are not eligible to receive public tuition support. So, according to his analysis, there is room for us to sort of address, if the board so chooses, to respond to the public comment that we received on this point. And I thought it would be helpful just to sort of have a quick conversation about this and see if everyone is in agreement that this is a direction that we may want to go, keeping in mind that the public comment period on Rule Series 2200 has not yet closed. So I don't think it's appropriate to come up with language or to make any decisions because we're still waiting to hear from other members of the public. But since we're all here together today, I just wanted to sort of get everyone up to date and then just really see how everyone feels about this.
Thank you, Jennifer. And I think it's also worth noting that we have received public comment from the Vermont Independent Schools Association indicating that it supports withholding public tuition from schools that do not comply with those non-discrimination laws. I think that's a really important point. So I'll just speak and then open up if there are any other comments, but I'm very much in support of a change to our rules to ensure that public money is only going to schools that have non-discrimination policies with respect to both enrollment as well as employment. Any comments from other board members?
I would just say I will echo that, and I was appreciative of our conversation in the subcommittee, and I'm grateful to see us moving in this direction. And it's nice to have also had Mill's reflection on it as well. I think it's the right thing to do.
Okay, Tammy and then Jenna.
I'll just echo that this is really important, and I completely agree with the statement that you just made, Oliver. I also, in this, I'd just like to put this out there as a comment or something I'd like to understand better as we move forward, and probably not something to address today, but I'd like to understand in the context of a NEASC review or an outside accrediting review, what kind of things are they considering in their review of independent schools with respect to discrimination? And I asked that question, or sort of put that out as a placeholder for a conversation with the thinking as we move toward potentially using outside accrediting agencies to help us with our review, periodic review of independent schools. It would be useful for us to understand where they see their role, what their review process looks like with respect to those things, so that we can consider whether or not we want to delegate and the extent to which we want to delegate to those agencies, and versus things that we may want to continue to have the Agency of Education pursue.
So Tammy, thanks for bringing that up. I do want to address that briefly because we have had some discussions prior to your appointment to the board on that specific point, and the view that I've expressed personally, and I think is shared by others on the board, is that the trend generally that we want to go in is we want to rely more on external accreditation, particularly as it relates to the governance of an institution and the academic program. There are certain threshold matters, particularly around health and safety and civil rights, where even if there is some dipstick check by that accrediting agency, we want to hold those much closer under closer state supervision. So that's, generally speaking, that's sort of the direction that we've been headed. Jen, I don't know if you wanted to add anything onto that.
No, I think you put it pretty succinctly. So the idea is that, and this is sort of moving into, what I would refer to as phase 2 of the subcommittee's work. we're not there yet, but just sort of looking down the pike here, I think the idea is that, we would move the discussion of external accrediting agencies into the body of Rule 2200, the whole series, figure out where that goes, figure out what that structure would look like, and really work on creating a framework for recognizing accrediting agencies, what we expect those accrediting agencies to do in order to be recognized by the State Board of Education, and then sort of keep to ourselves, as a state board with, the Assistant Agency of Education, the things that are Vermont specific, particularly because, we are one of the few states where we do have public tuition money flowing to independent schools. So I think that sort of heightens our responsibility to ensure that the public funds are being spent in a way that is appropriate and in accordance with, our state.
And just to be clear, under current law and current rules, for purposes of enrollment, it's very clear that that all schools, whether they're public or independent, need to adhere to Vermont's Public Accommodations Act. So Jenna, and then Tom.
Hi. I just appreciate the work of the subcommittee and the update today. And I just probably don't have added value to this, except that I would totally support Oliver's opening statement and that of Kim and Amy as well. So thank you.
All right, thank you. Tom.
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes.
Great. Yeah, I think I'm anonymous on the call-in. So that's me there.
Excellent.
Just maybe some background about NEASC. They are about to implement a new set of standards on a new timeline that would work better for us and for our state. And in that standard, they have pulled out DEI standards. I haven't seen. I don't know if they include employment, because I do know that they accredit religious schools that have the ministerial exemption. So I don't think that those standards would deal with employment. So if that's a concern of the board, we should continue to look at that ourselves.
Okay. Great, thank you. Any other comments from the board? I think I'm hearing sort of, Lyle.
Yes, first of all, I definitely agree with your opening statement, Oliver. Thank you. And correct me when I read what I just wrote and tell me what I just wrote that isn't accurate. But in my mind, as I'm trying to work my way through this, it would appear that a school could be a recognized or approved school but not receive funding from the state or federal government because of their discrimination practices. Is that an accurate statement?
Not entirely accurate. It's fair to say that under the direction that we're going, we don't want public money to go to schools that have those practices. That's not to say that they're permitted under other law to have those practices. And there's a distinction between whether there's discriminatory practice on the basis relative to enrollment versus employment. So it's a little bit murky, but I think really what you're trying to convey is the direction we're headed is to say that we're going to sort of put aside those larger questions or larger issues and just say for purposes of being eligible to receive public tuition dollars, we're headed down a path that says we do not support and will not allow discrimination for enrollment or employment purposes as a condition to receive public monies.
That's what I meant to say. Thank you.
Okay.
And just for the record, I'll mention that I too am in support of this. I don't think I made that clear, but yes.
Good. So I think to answer your question, Jen, I'm hearing broad consensus amongst the board with this as a direction. So.
All right. We will continue with our work. Thank you all.
Excellent. Thank you. So that brings us to item number J. We have 4 schools up for renewal. These schools are all NEASC accredited, and you did receive some supporting material, and it looks like we do have representatives from the schools available to answer any questions. Before we go through each school, just a general observation for the agency, and that is there are a few schools in the mix here where we seem to be out of sequence, if you will, or we're off cycle. So there were a few of these as I reviewed the letters from NEASC. They appear to be about 5 years old, and they seem to be going through that 5-year process as we speak. So I'm going to suggest for those schools that when we handle the approval, we only approve them for a year so that we can get them back on the correct cycle. I want to be in a state when we're reviewing this that we're actually reviewing the most recent material, and it feels like we're looking at information on these schools that's 5 years old. And so, Secretary French, I don't know if you have any quick response to that.
No, I don't, but it makes sense to me. Patrick Halliday, our director of our quality divisions here, and as I believe Cassandra Ryan might be as well. Patrick, do you have any thoughts on that? Or?
No, I noticed the same thing as we go. There's several that were, I think, at least 2, I think, that were 2016 when they were last approved, and they're up for their renewal cycle in 2021, at least according to the letter. What I don't know is if NEASC is on that, has been able to maintain that cycle over the course of the last 18 months, and it's possible that they are being pushed back. So I don't know that when they said 5 years, if they're still able to do that in 5 years, but it's possible that Cassandra's has been able to join the call, and she might have an answer to that level of detail. My concern, and this is obviously the decision of the board, my concern is if, say, I believe Vermont Commons was one of those that was 2016, if I'm not mistaken.
Yep.
But if we did 1 year approval if the board did 1 year approval for Vermont Commons with the idea that NEASC is going to be taking place in 2021, that maybe because of the pandemic, NEASC approval review is actually not going to be taking place until spring of 2023 or something, just because they're off cycle, and I just don't know the answer to that question.
Okay. Cassandra, are you with us?
I am, thank you. So I would say that we have received information that NEASC may be off schedule as well. I wouldn't be able to tell you precisely when they are scheduling these reviews for the schools that are on the list currently. Okay. But I definitely understand the need, or the reason behind syncing them up. It's always been the intent of the program to keep them in sync. But again, with COVID and with the remote situations, it has definitely resulted in a less synced up review.
Okay. So I am going to suggest for those schools that we, when we get to them, so we'll take these in turn, but I'm going to suggest that we have a shorter window so that we can bring them back and hopefully that review will be complete. And if it's not ready, I would suggest to the agency that we would hold off on reviewing them until that NEASC accreditation review is complete. I think it'll just be a more productive conversation this time next year. So with that, we'll take these in turn. The first is the Lake Champlain Waldorf School. So in the interest of time, I'm not going to ask for a presentation because there's a fair amount of material that was submitted, and we did ask board members to review that in advance. So I'd like to really, first of all, ask whomever is from the Waldorf school to just identify themselves for the record, and then would entertain questions from board members.
I'm Jess Darland. I'm the head of school at Lake Champlain.
Excellent, thank you. So are there any questions from board members for the agency or the Lake Champlain Waldorf School?
I should say that I'm Christina Bell, and I am the board president at Lake Champlain, and I'm on the call.
Okay, wonderful. Thank you.
Yeah, one more. Daniel Kavanaugh is the treasurer of the board for Lake Champlain Waldorf School.
Okay. So I have several questions for the school, but I want to provide an opportunity for my board colleagues to ask any questions they may have before I proceed. Okay. Why don't I open it up then with some questions, and that may prompt some further questions. So, so the questions I have, first of all, this is one of the schools where we do actually have recent information from NEASC. So there's a letter from July 19th. There is somewhat cryptic reference to some finances and also some structural concerns around declining enrollment, and there are references with some language around, quote, significant challenge. There's a paragraph in here on page 2 that appears to be incomplete and is a little confusing, if not a little concerning. And it states, founding faculty turnover, comma, significantly declining enrollment at the high school, and a 100% new administrative team, along with restructuring throughout the school, and, quote, the result is a very high level of performance, accountability, effectiveness, and buy-in for the administrative work of our school, end quote. And it just sort of hangs there. So there's something wrong with this letter. And I don't know, Patrick, if perhaps you might be able to add some context there.
I don't know anything about the, I noticed the same thing, but I don't know anything about the, this is the letter from the director of NEASC, Jay Stroud. I was hoping that maybe Lake Champlain Waldorf might be able to provide a little bit more context if they know.
So that was the first sort of, I guess, concern that I had was the letter implies that there are pretty significant concerns, but then it just sort of drops off. And then the second sort of unrelated concern is, the last time I reviewed Vermont's vaccination rates in schools, the data that was last published, my recollection is that this school had the lowest rates of student vaccination of all public and independent schools in the state of Vermont. That's a real concern, and I would like to hear the school's perspective on why that is and what it may be doing to, first of all, ensure that it is complying with the regulatory requirements around vaccination reporting, and if there's any other context they want to provide. So I'll turn it over to the head of school and others to address those two questions.
Thanks. I'm happy to speak to both of those. I guess I can't speak necessarily to the syntax of the letter, but the really fundamental issues are part of what was identified in our 2016 full accreditation visit. Our school really has been in a state where many of our founding faculty had been retiring, and it sort of opened up a sinkhole life of our school. And it was a pretty acute time for a couple of years. Our school seriously considered closing in the summer of 2019. Our current president of the board can speak to that a little bit more. And out of that turmoil, my head of school position was created for the first time. I was brought up from another school in Atlanta where I had been working, and we've restructured the school. We've invested in sort of new programs, different types of professionalism, and NEASC is right to be working with us carefully and to be watching our progress. We are stabilizing, and there are some exciting signs of growth and stability. And those fundamental issues from our 2016 visit have not been fully and tidily resolved. We had a check-in call with NEASC a few weeks ago, and we're actually having a visitor come out next week and we feel good about it. They feel good about us. And yet, I think additional attention is merited.
Okay. I noted on that in the letter that they had not actually reviewed the finances yet, and that was going to be part of the site visit. So that sounds like that's happening next week.
Perhaps we did submit our audited financials as part of this report that was submitted in May, and we haven't been asked as part of next week's visit to make those available, though we certainly will and can.
Okay. Because the letter did specifically reference that, the report was accepted with the expectation that a member of the NEASC staff will visit the school this coming fall to review enrollment and the current status of the school's finances.
All right, yeah, so that's Jim Mooney, and he's coming next week. And of course, our audits are all clean. When I had come in, we had about an $800,000 budget deficit, and through a little bit of pain and a lot of care and some luck here and there, we have about a $500,000 surplus right now. I mean, surplus is overstating it, but we have money to invest in the future of our school.
Okay.
Christina, do you want to speak to those dynamics as well?
Sure. The pain point that we discussed the summer of 2019, we did have some attrition, not a huge number of students, but what turned out to be a huge financial impact because we're a small school. And so in that summer, the faculty, this was a faculty-led school, proposed a budget that was $886,000 beyond what we would be bringing in with tuition dollars. And of course, you can make that up with an annual fund, but an annual fund of $200,000 or less is better. We had achieved raising $350,000 for the annual fund the year prior, but it was quite a stretch. And so we realized that we needed a mechanism, in other words, a decision maker, to create either, and actually both, to cut our expenses. The faculty did not have a great mechanism for cutting expenses. They were organized by branch. And so it was hard for the early childhood to find a whole lot of money to cut out of the budget as well. It was difficult for the lower school and the high school. And so our plan was to bring in a head of school who would have decision-making power to review our finances and cut expenses if necessary mid-year, which Jazz did ask to do mid-year, and she did do. The pandemic hit in March. In February, we had a very positive financial outlook. And the result of her being there that first year was that she cut $1.4 million from our budget, or I think it was 1.3 million. And she also, we did lay off a number of employees, which was painful, but we, in some ways, right-sized our school. We did experience an enrollment dip. In the pandemic, we went from 197 to 100 in May with a lot of nervous families. But that was in the summer of 2020. But our enrollment has looked like this. It has been 197 in 2019-20, and 153 was our total, even though it did dip to 100 in the summer. 153 was our total this past year, or in 2021. And now in 21-22, we are at 185. It could be 183. And projections look like it would be something like 195 next year. So we had been seeing enrollment declining, and we are actually seeing enrollment increasing. We have 60 new families this year. And yet overall, our high school enrollment is a point of study and is low. So the overall picture being enrollment increasing, but in the high school particularly, we have decreased in our total.
Okay. Board members, any questions from other board members?
I am curious to hear the answer with regard to your point about the COVID vaccination.
Well, it's not for COVID, Jen. It's for other childhood immunizations. Yep.
Oh, okay. Well, even more so.
Chair Olson, this is Patrick.
Patrick,
so,
yes.
Yes, so just a point of clarification. The NEASC visit, my sense is that it's what I would term a midterm visit. It's not the regular visit. They're coming to look at the progress of the financial health of the institution and maybe enrollment. So this is something that they do on a regular basis, just to check in midterm to see where things are at, if there is or is not progress on the things that they highlighted on their last visit.
Yes, yep, you're correct. And the concern I have here, Patrick and Cassandra, is on the green sheet. On item number 7, it states that that NEASC it references NEASC's findings of adequate financial capacity, but the letter from NEASC indicates that there are concerns and that they're really not going to be looking into that until this site visit, which sounds like scheduled for next week. So it feels to me a bit premature to be making these findings and approving the school at this point until that site visit is complete.
Right.
And it sounds like there's significant concern here.
Mm-hmm.
But back to Jen Samuelson's point, I would like to hear a little bit more about this, what's going on with vaccinations.
Yeah, I'm happy to speak to that. I'm not familiar with us having been the lowest rate in the state. The data is not published anymore. The Department of Health made a switch, which is a little bit frustrating because I was also eager to see the changes in our school's data. When we do have it last, which I think was from the 2019 to 2020 school year, I believe that we were number 9 or number 8 or number 9 in terms of, well, which is cold comfort. You're right that we do have a number of families claiming a religious exemption from vaccination. Drastically out of step with other schools in the state. And that is something that our board took up even before the pandemic and started looking into. And I believe that we've seen about a 20% increase in our overall vaccination rate in the 3 years that I've been here. But I like the state's data because right now we have to go through and look for each individual vaccine and each individual grade. And of course, our registrar is justly protective of that information. There are a lot of restrictions, and so I'm not able to have the raw data in order to know specifically where our gaps remain. Many families here are on a delayed vaccine schedule, so it shows up as unvaxxed if their vaccination is not complete. And so the school has also had a number of conversations and taken some steps toward parent communication. Like, to what extent do we take on the responsibility for reminding parents that their child's going to be due for that second round in April or something, so that we can get them caught up rather than them starting the school year behind and then it shows up as unvaccinated. As far as our COVID vaccination uptake rate is, based on what we know, and we have not required families to present evidence of the vaccine, but based on what we know,
let me stop you there because I don't want us to go off track. The focus of my original inquiry was around the childhood vaccinations and specifically around kind of, your overall compliance with our rules on that, which don't extend to the COVID vaccination. So we'll leave that to the side for the moment. So I want to go back to, just in the interest of time, I want to go back to board members and see if there are any other questions.
And if I may, Oliver, I can affirm that we do require the religious exemption form for any, we are. But whether or not there's a community dynamic that needs more attention is something our board is really actively working with.
Okay. Board members, other questions? Do board members feel comfortable proceeding with the secretary's recommendation at this point?
Oliver, I'm curious if knowing that NEASC is coming next week or shortly thereafter, how long does it customarily take to get the report from NEASC so that we could make a decision with full information? Like, are we talking about, could we do this next month or would we have to wait longer?
This is Patrick. Just as a point of comparison, and I don't know how extensive it'll be for NEASC's visit this time. They visited Lake Champlain, Waldorf, I believe, in May and issued the letter in July. So it was about a 2-month turnaround for that. I don't know if that's going to be the same turnaround for this follow-up visit.
Okay. Would board members like to postpone consideration of this until after the agency's received this further information?
Yes.
May I? I'm not at all convinced that I'm not certain that there is a report forthcoming after this visit. My understanding is that it's a support visit to provide feedback to us. I'm not sure that there would be a written report that would be provided to the agency.
I think the concern here is that we rely upon this accreditation to provide evidence of that the school has adequate financial capacity. And what we've heard today and what was sort of referenced or alluded to in the letter indicates that there are concerns out there. So personally, I'll open up to other board members for their feedback, but I'd like to see the result. I'd like to hear more from NEASC as to their attestation of the school's financial capacity. That's one of the findings we need to make, and I don't feel like we have sufficient evidence. The evidence that we have right now indicates that there are problems. Board members, anybody else?
Oliver, this is Tammy. Is it an option for us to make that a specific request and provide a timeline for receiving those information that and Waldorf can share back with NEASC, right? So if they're not providing a specific report after this visit, are you able to make a specific request for some sort of assessment or letter back with them within a certain period of time?
I think the agency can handle that because the agency is the one that's sort of collecting the information and presenting the recommendation and the data that we need to make our findings. And I guess my personal view is we don't have sufficient information and what we have is concerning. So I'm hoping that Patrick, I'm sort of looking at you here on the screen, that you can sort of take this away and you'll take whatever steps are necessary to make sure that what comes back to us is full and complete information.
Yeah, we can reach out to NEASC and talk to Lake Champlain Waldorf after the visit to see if there's additional information that we're able to bring to bear.
Yeah. Tom.
Yes, thank you. So my experience on the Commission of Independent Schools was that after a focused staff visit, that there is a report back to the commission about how that visit went. I'm not sure if there's a follow-up letter to the school, but there would be additional communication from the NEASC staff about how that visit went. So, and if I remember correctly, the NEASC board or NEASC commission will meet in November, maybe, is their next meeting. So we could have information from NEASC by our next meeting, if not by the December meeting.
Yep. So I'm just, in the interest of time, I'm going to, if board members have an opposing view, I'll ask people to express that. But otherwise, I'm sensing, just reading the body language here and some of the questions, that we'd like the agency to come back to us when they have the full information from NEASC. So if it's November, great. If it's December, we'll take it up then. But I think it's better that we have all the information to make an informed decision here. Does anybody on the board disagree with that? Okay, so we'll do that. And I thank the folks from the Waldorf school, and I understand that, it may be a little frustrating. It's going to take a little longer, but I hope you can appreciate that we do have an obligation to do our due diligence, and there are some concerns here that were raised in the information provided, and we want to make sure we get this right. And I think it's in the interests of everybody, the public at large, and certainly you as a school, to make sure that we all feel comfortable with this. Okay. So next on the next one up is the Vermont Commons School. So is there a member, a representative from the Vermont Commons School prepared to address the board?
Yes, my name is Dexter Mahaffey, and I'm the head of school at Vermont Commons School.
Excellent. Thank you, Dexter. So board members, any questions for the Vermont Commons School or the agency? Getting some feedback from phone number ending in 58. If you wouldn't mind muting yourself, please. So this was one of the schools that had was a little bit out of cycle. I think it was from 2016. So this would be one I think would be helpful to if we were to approve this one, that we would approve it for a year so that we would have time to reassess with more current information and get them back in kind of in cycle.
I guess, Oliver, I have a question for Dexter. Dexter, has NEASC told you, are they on track to make another visit to your school in the coming year?
Thanks, Tom. The reason that we are off track is because NEASC delayed visits because of COVID. And so they are behind. I was going to speak to that earlier, but there wasn't an appropriate opening moment. So the NEASC themselves delayed accreditation. Some schools did stay on last year's cycle, choosing to do virtual visits. And I actually was on a team for another New England school virtual visits, but we wanted to do the in-person. And so we are a year behind on that. And so what that means is we are in the middle of our self-study this year, and the foundation visit will happen this coming April. Then the program visit is scheduled for a year from next week. And so if you give approval for 1 year, that will not be sufficient time for you to get a complete report from NEASC. It will take a few months, although hopefully, and Tom, you could speak better to this than I, hopefully it would be, say, January of 2023, give or take, or perhaps it's a little later than that. But I would think that would be about as early as a report would be available on our self-study. Does that sound about right, Tom, timing-wise, for NEASC to process that?
That sounds right. If it's a fall visit next year, then you should get your letter from NEASC in January of the following year.
Okay. So perhaps we might want to consider like a March 2023 as the next renewal. Does that sound extra? Would that be reasonable?
Oh, sorry. I wasn't sure if that was a question to me or to the board. Yes, I think that would give you enough time to get everything from them. They will have delivered the report to us at that point, and their decision on reaccreditation through NEASC by that point, I believe. That's the earliest I can see that happening. So March sounds reasonable.
Okay.
So Oliver, would you be looking for a motion for continuing their accreditation through April of 2023 or
2023.
2023.
Correct.
Yeah.
So I'm going to look for a motion to adopt the secretary's recommended action with the amendment that the approval will be through April. I always forgot. Are there 30 days or 31 days in April?
30.
30 days. So April 30th of 2023. Tammy, you have your hand up?
Thanks. I just wanted to note that I'll be abstaining from the votes due to a conflict on this one, and so Suzanne needs to do a roll call.
Okay, thank you. So, so sounds like Lyle, you were offering a motion with.
I would make that motion, yes.
Okay.
To approve the secretary's recommendation with accreditation through April 2023.
Okay. Motion's been made. Is there a second? It's been seconded by Kim Gleason. Is there any discussion? Okay. Hearing none, we'll proceed to a vote, and we will do this by roll call. So just again, the motion is to approve the secretary's recommended action with respect to the Vermont Common School, modified by changing the approval through April 30th, 2023. All those in, excuse me, I'm going to turn it over to Suzanne to call the roll. All those, so yeah, call the roll, please, Suzanne.
Yes, sir. Tammy Colby. Oh, yes.
Well, no, for the record, Tammy. You're going to be abstaining.
Yes, I said abstain. I'm sorry. Is there?
Oh, thank you.
Might be a timing glitch. Okay, thanks.
Okay, thank you. Patrick Brown.
Yes.
Lyle Jepson.
Yes.
Angelita Pena.
Yes.
Kim Gleason.
Yes.
Jennifer Samuelson.
Yes.
Jenna O'Farrell.
Yes.
Tom Lovett.
Yes.
Chair Olson, will you be voting?
Yes, in the affirmative. Okay.
And the vote passes. Thank you.
Excellent. And I just, Dexter, I just want to obviously draw your attention to the conditions of this approval. There are a number of these conditions that are stated here, so we didn't go through those, but I presume that you're well aware of those. So, okay. Thank you. So with that, we will now move on to our next school, which is the Thaddeus Stevens School. So is there somebody representing Thaddeus Stevens with us today?
Hi, yes, Julie Hanson, I'm head of school.
Excellent. Thank you, Julie. So members of the board, are there questions for Ms. Hanson or the agency?
I guess, Julie, same question I asked Dexter. Do you have a sense of when your decennial visit will happen?
Yeah, hi, thanks, Tom. It's nice to hear your voice. I can just barely hear you. We're under the new accreditation program this year, which is in two parts. It's divided between program and a program visit and foundational. Foundational deals with policies, financial status, etc., and is primarily with the board as opposed to the whole school. That is scheduled for this spring. And then our program visit is for the fall. So it's soon. We're working on it now, actually.
Thank you.
Jennifer.
So I'm sorry, just to clarify, the visit that you're talking about for the fall, is it this fall or is it fall of 2022?
wait a minute, I gotta get my number right. It's fall, let's see, fall of 2022. Our spring visit is this May 2021. Yeah, it's 2022. Is that right? No, 2022, both of them. It's coming up in spring. I forgot Christmas is almost here. And then New Year. So we're behind a year in ours.
Thank you.
Okay. Other questions from board members?
So am I hearing correctly that we would need a similar motion to what we did with the Commons?
Yes. And Julie, what do you think would be reasonable to come back to us?
You know, I need to first say, I didn't hear whatever it was you proposed with Dexter because I was cut out and I was running up and down the stairs trying to reconnect. So can you?
Yeah, so what we ended up doing with the Vermont Common School was we renewed them through April of 2023 with the idea that would put them back on cycle. Yeah. So I think the question is does that sound right? Would that put you back on cycle as well, or would it different?
Yes, I think it would. Yeah, I hope so. Yeah, that would be the goal.
Okay. So is there a motion to that effect?
I would make that motion that we approve the Secretary's recommendation with accreditation through April of 2023.
Okay, the motion's been made by Mr. Jepson. Is there a second?
I'll second it.
Okay, it's been seconded by Tammy Colby. Is there any further discussion? All righty. With that, all those in favor of adopting the Secretary's recommended action with the modification that the approval is through April 30th, 2023, please raise your hand and say yes.
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 Okay. Those opposed, please raise your hand and say no. Are there any abstentions? Okay, the motion appears to pass unanimously. The motion has carried unanimously, and you've adopted the Secretary's recommended action as amended. Next up is the Vermont Academy of Science and Technology in Randolph. I'm sorry?
Well, I was just saying goodbye and thank you. That's all. Sorry.
Oh, yes, thank you. Okay. Is there anybody here from the Vermont Academy of Science and Technology?
Yes, this is Charlie Watson. I'm the director of the V.S.A.
Excellent. Welcome, Charlie.
Thank you.
So, members of the board, are there any questions for Mr. Watson or the agency? Mr. Jepson?
I guess
Lyle and then Tom.
I was just going to ask Mr. Watson if enrollment is down at V.S.A. and it seems like it was higher than that, and maybe it's a COVID common problem. So just wondering.
I believe so. Now, first off, I'm gonna put a little bit of a caveat in this that I've been here for about 6 weeks, so my analysis is probably a little bit thin. But I think that the what we're seeing, we think goes along with the other, like career and technical centers and other places, that there's a drop in enrollment, but I'm this year able to get out to schools a little bit more on an in-person basis, and I'm seeing a fair amount of interest. So yes, it's probably down a little bit, but it's still pretty strong. We have 40 students at the two campuses.
Is it correct to say that your financial picture is different than a quote-unquote regular school, and that you're not necessarily dependent on heavily on staff because you're, for lack of a better term, sprinkling students into currently operating classes already?
That's right. Yeah, the students here attend the otherwise normally scheduled college classes. They do it as high school seniors and do it in in-person or virtual dual enrollment kind of a role. So You're right there. I mean, I guess I'm the staff. But beyond that, the instructional staff is all part of the college.
Any other questions?
Yeah, I'd like to just clarify the difference between this approval and the dual enrollment program. It seems to be very similar, and the accreditation dealt with the entire school, not the program, not the one-year program. So I'm wondering how this is different than dual enrollment, if it is.
For our purposes, dual enrollment happens in a different environment. So it happens in a career center, in a high school, where those classes can be taught in those high school or career technical center environments, and they can gain college credit for those approved credits or those approved courses. And the courses that are taught in the dual enrollment kind of mode are taught by instructors at the high school level who have been approved by the departments at the college.
Okay, thank you. So this is more like the early college program at other schools.
This is an early college program. That's correct. And predominantly it's in person, although there are some who are still choosing to do it virtually, but those numbers are pretty small.
Thank you.
Okay. Tammy.
Thank you. Just a quick question. With the slated sort of reorganization of the Vermont Technical College being wrapped into Vermont State University, are there any implications for this program that are sort of maybe coming down the road as a result of this reorg that we should be considering in our review?
At least from the perspective of my my supervisor, who is the dean of academics, VST is still intended to continue as it is. We don't really know how this reorganization is going to shake out in the long run about how students can cross campuses, enroll in courses in different locations. But I think that there's no intention that I've been able to tell at this point of changing the VST program, with the possible extension of maybe expanding it.
Lyle.
To that comment, if there's a change in curriculum or delivery, they would be required, they being VTC, would be required to alert the Agency of Education, correct? Is that correct?
I believe that's correct, yes.
Yes, Lyle, that is correct.
So Tammy, maybe it's not, although it's a concern to all of us where the Vermont State College system is going to land, it probably is not a concern because Charlie would need to alert us if there were changes in delivery.
Right, and I've received no indication of that yet at all.
Okay, so just an observation. This is a bit unusual, and I just want to flag this for the committee, the subcommittee working on independent school rules update, that there's an interesting nuance of the relationship between the accrediting entity here and NEASC. There's some sort of legal distinctions and I guess separation of duties, if you will, and we don't have time to discuss it now, but I think it's worth just tying this off in your committee's work to make sure that in our rulemaking, as we're looking at recognizing external accreditors, we're not sort of inadvertently leaving off this entity, which seems to be very much related to NEASC, but has been bifurcated due to some federal regulatory requirements. So I just want to point that out. Alrighty, any other further discussion? Otherwise, I would entertain a motion. Oh, Mr. Halliday.
Yeah, I just wanted to very briefly say too that there's a note in there about fire drills, which are being required, but our general counsel has determined that, well, first of all, fire drills have not been done, but that it's also not practical and in that setting, just because of being on a college campus and the like. So, and that's all.
Yep. No, noted that.
But if I could add on to that just a little bit, they are being conducted for those students who are living in residence. They are being conducted there.
Good. Alrighty. Board members, is there a motion to adopt the Secretary's recommended action? I'm looking at you, Lyle. All right, it's been moved by Jen Samuelson. Is there a second? It's been seconded by Ken Gleason. Oh. Is there further discussion? Alrighty. We'll call the vote then. All those in favor of adopting the Secretary's recommended action, please signify by saying yes and raising your hand.
Yes.
Yeah. Yes.
Those opposed, please indicate by saying no and raising your hand. Okay, are there any abstentions? Okay, hearing none, it appears that the motion has carried unanimously. The motion has carried unanimously, and you have adopted the Secretary's recommended action with respect to the Vermont Academy of Science and Technology. So thank you, Mr. Watson. Good luck as you take on your new role. And thank you to all of our other schools who participated in this review. So with that, we're a little bit behind schedule.
All right. Thank you all for inviting me.
Yes. We're now on item K, which is we're going to have a presentation from the chair of the Ethnic and Social Equity Standards Working Advisory Group, otherwise known as the Act 1 Advisory Group. So I'm hoping we have someone with us.
Yes, I'm here.
Oh, wonderful.
Hi.
Thank you. So Amanda, if you, for the record, if you wouldn't mind introducing yourself, and the floor is yours.
Great, thank you. Hi, for everybody. My name is Amanda Garces. I am the Director of Policy, Education, and Outreach for the Vermont Human Rights Commission, and I serve as the chair of the Act 1 Working Group. I know that there are some people that are new, so I wanted to ask if you wanted me to go over a little bit of the genesis of Act 1, or go
I think you
straight
should.
to. Okay.
Yeah.
So let me start with that, and I believe I am able to share my screen. Okay. And you can see my screen?
We can, yep.
Okay, great. I cannot see you. Okay, now I can see you. So I'll just give you a really brief overview of how Act 1 came to be, and then I can give you a progress report on where we're at right now. So I always like to start by just giving a little bit of the context of the existence of Act 1. Here's the green report that I called, which is a report that happened in 1999 by the Vermont Advisory Committee to the U.S. Commission on Civil Rights, that basically found that racism in Vermont schools was pervasive, and that administrators, the school board members, and the agency were not really doing anything about it. In 2003, they did a follow-up report and found that not much had changed and that many of the problems persisted. One of them they noted that was that curriculum materials and lessons plans promoted racial stereotypes. And one of the conclusions was that there was a need for a bias-free curriculum. In 2015, there was a kickback report that was done by the agency by Vermont Legal Aid that found that students with disabilities and students of color were 2 to 3 times more likely to be suspended and expelled than their white counterparts. The agency also found in 2015 and 16, finding that non-Caucasian students were excluded at this proportionally higher rate than their Caucasian peers. In December 2017, Act 54, the report on racial disparities in our state, was issued by the Attorney General and the Vermont Human Rights Commission, and they found that there, out of the 5 systems in which racial disparities exist, education was one of them, and that the themes that came out of that was the need to change the culture of our state in regards to race, suggesting to teach children from an integrated curriculum that fairly represents both the contributions of people of color, but also the history accurately. Act 54 also suggests to educate state employees about implicit bias, white privilege, white fragility, and white supremacy, and increase the representation of people of color in the state by recruiting, hiring, and retention of BIPOC folks. We know about the Vermont youth risk behavior. In 2019, they found that LGBT youth are 2 times as likely to have been bullied in the last 30 days than their heterosexual peers. LGBTQ youth are 3.5 times as likely to have experienced unwanted sexual contact in their lifetime than their heterosexual peers. We are finding that they are 3 times as likely to have skipped school in the last 30 days because of feeling unsafe. And the LGBTQI plus youth are 4.5 times as likely to have attempted suicide in the last 12 months. According to the U.S. Department of Justice report on hate crimes in 2017, they found that 35 hate crimes reported were based, let me back up. 51% were based on motivation involving racial bias, 23% involving sexual orientation bias, 17% involving religious bias, and 9% disability bias. Acts of harassment and discrimination based on religious affiliation, including but not limited to anti-Semitism and Islamophobia, had been reported last year, more than this year, but hate symbols appear frequently. So this is the history of Vermont, basically. In 2017, a coalition of BIPOC folks with disabilities, and folks from the LGBTQIA advocacy world came together and kind of spearheaded what is now Act 1. That was a relationship with a lot of agencies trying to come up with the language. Our job, so the bill passed in 2019. And our job really is to review the standards for student performance adopted by the State Board of Education, and to recommend a state board updates and additional standards that fully recognizes history, contributions, and perspectives of ethnic and social groups. We may also review state statutes, state board rules, and school district and supervisory union policies that concern or impact our standards. So that's kind of the big overview. So for the past, so the law passed in 2019, we started meeting, and then we have been, the things we have done is we have created a tool to kind of look at the standards, and then we started looking at the education quality standards, which is the bulk of this work. Now I'm gonna change my, can you see the new?
Yes.
I don't, okay. So what we have been doing since January, in January 2021, we submitted a report to the State Board and to the General Assembly. We had done some work on the EQS and submitted that report in January. We went back to our group and decided that there was more work that needed to be done for it. So we, for the past year, worked on it. Here's a bubble of all the people that are giving comments currently to our revisions. So we have 23 members in our, right now we have 20, but we will have 23 by the end, but in the next few months. We just had 3 additional members to be added to our working group. And as you can see, the first little circle of are all our working group members. So we have the Principals Association, School Board Association, is V.S.A, which are, who are the V.S.As? I forget all the V's, but all the V's.
Yeah, Superintendents Association.
Superintendents Association, the Curriculum Directors Associations, Vermont NEA. We have the HRC, which I represent. We have the Independent Schools Associations, the Agency of Education, the State of Vermont Racial Equity Office. We have 2 students, soon to be 4. We have an Abenaki representative, soon to be 2. And then the rest of the members are appointed by the Education Justice Coalition of Vermont. And they come from different marginalized identities, representing different marginalized identities. So everybody looked at this document. Their job was to go back to their organization to get feedback. Then they came back September 30th. Some are still lingering, but they're coming in. And there's a EQS subcommittee that is going to be taking all these comments and putting them in place. Before I move from this, I should say that that's the working groups, but on the outer layers, we had sent practitioners from Vermont requests for them to look at what we have done. So we have lots of teachers, the Clemens Family Farm, we have school board members, we have disability rights advocates, and the Vermont Migrant Education Program that works with a lot of the ELL families. They gave us feedback, including people like FAIR, who and the Jewish Communities of Vermont Anti-Semitic Task Group. They also submitted comments to us. So we're going to be revising all of those comments. We will discuss them. So this month in November, we're incorporating all of that. December 16, we are going to be looking at all those comments. And then between December and January, they have to go back to seek full approval from their membership, our working group members. And then if there are things that we are not going to agree, they're going to give us a dissenting view of why. And that's what you will get in January. Will be our full EQS submission. And if there are members of the group that disagree in some of the things, you would also have that so you could see. We hope that you would also get all of the comments that were made by the people and all the comments that we did adopt and the ones that we didn't. So that is a very comprehensive inclusion that we have made. We have people from all the marginalized identities that we are hoping to represent. And that's where we're at.
Excellent.
With the EQS. I should say we're also in the process of getting an RFP or working to try to get an RFP to hire a consultant to help us with the next stage of the work.
Wonderful. This, if you could leave this timeline slide up for a moment, Amanda, that would be helpful. So Amanda and I met with the vice chair of this working group a few weeks ago, and I thought it would be a good idea for her to provide an update for us, so that we could sort of start thinking about next steps. Looking at this timeline here. This will be coming before us in January of next year. So as we start planning our work for next year, I expect that this will be a significant body of work because, as you know, once we open up rulemaking, to address, specific matters, we're opening up rulemaking for that entire series. So there will be an opportunity, and it will probably be a good time to review some other sections of the EQS unrelated to this. So we're going to want to think about perhaps establishing a committee that can focus on this work as well as other potential revisions. I like the way this has progressed, and it's very analogous to the work of related to Act 173. So I sort of see a very similar path. And for those of you who weren't on the, or have only recently joined the board, Act 173 passed several years ago, set up a working group very similar to what's happened here, that did actually the bulk of the work, brought together a diverse group of stakeholders to look at our rulemaking around special education and some very significant changes to our special education rules. And that stakeholder group really did yeoman's work of bringing in a lot of different voices, and in the end came up with some really good consensus around recommendations that then came to the state board. We sort of in parallel established a committee that took on those rules and also looked at some further changes to the Rule 2200 series, which we've been talking about quite a bit. And I think really, the point is 173, the working group there established a really solid foundation that enabled us to work very efficiently as we opened up the formal rulemaking process. So I see a very similar thing happening here with the output of the Act 1 working group. And I think it's important to signal to the public at large that this is going to be a big focus of the board, and it aligns with our goals around diversity, equity, and inclusion. So any questions or comments from board members? Kim.
Thanks. I just want to say thank you. I am really heartened to see all those who've been part of the process and the voices that have been brought to bear on the work. So I am really enthusiastic about what will come out of this work. And I really look forward to this board taking on the part that is ours when we have these suggestions in front of us. It's, I'm sure, in many ways long overdue, but it's a big lift, and I'm really grateful that you all are taking this on and that we will as well.
Thank you.
Other comments or questions from the board?
Hi, Amanda.
Yes.
Yeah, this is Patrick Brown. Thanks for all your hard work on this. I would add, if there's an opportunity to add additional voices, I quickly scanned the groups and I didn't see Vermont Adult Learning. They're a really great entity. And also the Vermont New American Advisory Council. I noticed you had 2 students. And please be aware, a lot of the schools now have their own racial justice committees. There is a vibrant one at CVU and in other places. So if you're looking for additional student representation, there are a lot more very involved, very engaged student groups. And again, thank you. Thank you for all your hard work.
Thank you so much. I will definitely reach out to the Vermont Adult Learning. I did reach out to some of the New American organizations like ALD, but we did not get their comments. So I did not know that there was a New American group.
Yeah, and they have a website. It's VNAC, Vermont New American Advisory Council.
Oh, great. Thank you so much for that. I will definitely reach out to them. And we did, so the coalition did set up an application process for the new students that are coming in. And I think they have about 8 students that have applied. They're gonna go through an interviewing process in the next couple of weeks, and that's how they will get appointed. But we are also in touch with a lot of other students that we're hoping will give feedback at a later time as well. Okay. I would say that the document is very not accessible for many people. We did the little translation of like what kind of reading level it was, and it was a level 22. Okay. We do have members of our group that require some more access to it, so we did write a summary for them to be able to take part of that. But part of what you will get in January is a mirror plain language document. I am right now in the process of getting quotes from national organizations that actually translate legal documents to plain language documents. So because we're hoping that the families can actually have access to the document. Currently, as it stands, is really not accessible. So
now, are you thinking of having it translated?
Yes, that is the goal. The whole thing will be translated into plain language and into the 10 languages of our state that we know are common, and that a lot of the health we have learned from the multilingual task force that has really done great work on translating COVID information on a timely manner. So we've learned a great deal from them, and we are hoping that, yes, these documents will be translated to those 10 languages that are prevalent in our state.
Thank you.
Other comments or questions? Wonderful. Well, thank you so much, Amanda. This was very helpful, and as you can tell, the board is very supportive of the pre-work that, as it were, that you're doing. It certainly makes our job a lot easier, and having this timeline in front of us helps with our planning and setting expectations with ourselves as well as with the members of the public. Our goal is to be as accessible as possible to members of the public, and will welcome public input and feedback throughout the next stage of the process, and look forward to working with your group so that we can arrive at a set of formally adopted rules that everybody can rally around.
Great. Thank you so much for your time and for your work.
Excellent. Thank you.
Okay.
Bye. So next on our agenda is item L, which you'll recall we made a change there. So that's to discuss the correspondence we received from the Ripton School District, which was emailed out to all of you, I think, yesterday. And to summarize, they feel that they have not been able to have productive conversations with the ACSD regarding rejoining the ACSD, and their request of us or questions of us were to indicate whether we thought a third-party mediator would be appropriate, in generally just how, if we had any thoughts on how we could support a framework for negotiations, and then they feel that the ACSD board does not fully understand our expectations, and they're in summary, they're looking for us to clarify our expectations. So as you'll recall, when we had the rather lengthy conversation with Ripton and several other parties, we as a board arrived at a conclusion that Ripton, absent any other action, would turn into a supervisory district with all of the requisite responsibilities, but urged Ripton and ACSD to find a way to to have Ripton sort of merge back into the ACSD to avoid that from happening. My personal perspective, and I think it's shared by other members of the board, is that, you know, we were not suggesting that there was going to be some sort of negotiation, if you will, between ACSD and Ripton around sort of conditions by which, you know, Ripton might rejoin. I think, you know, those conversations sort of naturally happen, but, you know, I think my takeaway from the discussion that we had was very clear that I think, and this is important and instructive to other districts that may find themselves in the situation, that if you're going to withdraw and try to go it alone, you need to be thinking 3-4 steps ahead about the consequences, both with respect to the school that you intend to operate, but also the larger sort of governance context. And you, as the withdrawing entity, have an obligation to do your homework, to do your due diligence, and to have accomplished all of that planning in advance of moving forward. And it's not the Board of Education's job to solve these problems as they come up later on. So in summary, I think the message that I would like to give back to Ripton is that, you know, you have made a decision to withdraw. There are consequences of that decision. We do not want to impair other entities in your region with new challenges as a result of your decision. We're very supportive of if you find an alternate path where the other entities, such as a supervisory union that might be willing to accept you, are happy with that arrangement. We'll find a path to make that go forward. But, you know, this is in essence your responsibility to work out the details. And we're not suggesting that ACSD or any other entity out there absorb the responsibility for, you know, figuring this out. So anyway, that's sort of my perspective on this. I think it's shared by other members, but I want to open it up for discussion or thoughts. Secretary French.
Yeah, hi. I just wanted to add, not necessarily as a reaction to the communications from them, but prior to that, I had had some interaction with them as a result of the Regional School Board Association meeting and offered to come visit the school. So I just want to alert the board that I'm going to be doing a site visit, I think the first week of November. I've never been to the school before. And I'm also going to be meeting with the superintendent of ACSD at the same time. So I just want to alert you that I'll be on site.
Okay. Kim.
Thanks, Oliver. I would echo your concerns. I think it is certainly not a business we want to get into in terms of providing mediation. I think that I thought that we were sort of quite clear that we weren't going to force an SU out of an SD to accommodate this decision to withdraw, and it seemed more that they might go back to reconsider. And certainly I heard Superintendent Burrows suggest that at this time they were not anticipating school closures. So they have, I think, their own work to do among themselves, and I don't think we have any role in it.
Okay. Other board members? Okay. So I'm going to propose that I'll send a response back to the Ripton School Board. I'm going to indicate that first of all, that we can't offer suggestions as it relates to mediation. Secondly, to reinforce our general principle that the decision of a withdrawing district that creates the potential for impacts to other districts, our general direction is that we're not going to be supportive of encumbering those other districts with the consequences of a decision made by a withdrawing district. And my hope is that this message is aimed specifically at Ripton and in response to their question, but I'm also hoping, and I'm going to phrase this in such a way to sort of indicate general guidance to other districts similarly situated that may be in an earlier stage. And my hope here is I want to send a really clear message to other districts that are thinking about pursuing these types of things, that they really need to be thinking long and hard and several steps ahead about all of the potential consequences, and that they and they alone have the obligation to figure out a good, solid plan and avoid getting themselves into the situation that Ripton now finds itself in. So absent objection, that will be the sort of general tenor of my response back to Ripton in response to their request for clarification. I'm seeing nodding heads. I'm not seeing any opposition. Okay, good.
That sounds good, Oliver. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. So next, item M, legislative update. So the chair of the House Education Committee has reached out to me. She is going to be convening a meeting of the House Education Committee on October 27th, and has asked me to appear before the committee to testify on just sort of general update on what the board is working on, and also what specific recommendations we may have as far as statutory changes that we might be seeking. And then third, general update on how we're progressing with our roles and responsibilities, work with the Agency of Education. So obviously I'll be prepared to provide a general update on our rulemaking and where that stands. The legislation, proposed legislation or request for statutory changes, that's very much top of mind for me, apropos to the last agenda item, is going to be with your concurrence on the board, is to really, again, reiterate the need to address the process for towns to withdraw from union school districts and or be realigned to other school districts. That we really seem to be missing a process with adequate safeguards to ensure, good outcomes consistent with policy enshrined within Act 46 and Act 49. That's top of mind, and just want to hear any thoughts, concerns, objections to that, or if there are any other legislative statutory changes that we should also be advocating for. Not hearing anything. Okay, Jen?
Well, relating back to my presentation earlier on the work of the Independent School Rules Subcommittee, it would be helpful if we had some guiding legislation to help us as we frame this issue of, saying that any independent school who wishes to receive public funds shall not discriminate in its employment practices. It would be helpful to have that guiding legislation. So I would hope that that would be something that we could discuss.
Yep, that sounds good. Anything else?
And along those lines, are we done with our conversation about parochial schools and religious education and certification that they're not using funds for that?
That's a good question, and it is something that I think is on the agenda for phase 2 of our rulemaking. And Jen, I'm sort of looking at you to sort of confirm that. And within sort of our authority. but I think it's probably, to your point, it's probably worth bringing to the committee so that they're aware of that. So if they have concerns that we're going outside, coloring outside the lines, that they can indicate so.
Well, and actually, I don't know if Emily is still on this call, but I'm not, I guess I would want to run that scenario by Emily, because I know there's some pending litigation out there may affect what we do or don't do.
Yeah, that's why it's we sort of moved that into our phase 2 work.
Hi, this is Patrick, Chair Olson.
Yes, Patrick.
I just wanted to, Ms. Samuelson just alluded to employment practices, and I'm wondering if it would be appropriate to edit that to say employment and enrollment practices.
Oh, well, that's easy. The enrollment one is already covered under existing state law. Okay. It's the one that is a little less clear is around employment.
Okay, thanks for the clarification.
Yeah. So the Public Accommodations Act covers both public as well as independent schools. So it's the same law applies to systems.
Okay, thank you.
Is it too granular, Oliver, to talk about the CTE finance question that we talked about earlier?
I think it's, I think that's worth noting as well. And perhaps, Lyle, I could connect with you offline for some talking points on that.
Sure. And also
that is, I was just going to say that's an area.
There's also some information in the weighting study about that.
Yeah,
right.
We're actively working on the CTE revisions to the CTE finance process. So that's a piece of technical work that we have on our schedule for November.
Okay, so maybe we'll make reference to it, but not make a direct ask. Okay, good. Wonderful. So on that, I'm going to consult with Jen Samuelson so either I will be presenting on behalf of the board, or it will be a combination of Jen and I, or it may be Jen alone, because I have some, as I indicated before, I have some various family medical issues that are taking up some of my time at this point. But one of the two of us, if not both of us, will be representing the board's perspective in that meeting. So excellent. Unless there's anything else on that topic, I think we can move into retreat planning, item N. So we have postponed the retreat, and we've not set a specific date yet. And the reason for that is because a central focus of our discussion at the retreat, we want to be around roles and responsibilities vis-a-vis the Agency of Education and the State Board of Education. And as you will recall, I had asked Tammy to sort of lead the committee that's focused on this work. And the thinking is that the committee will do some pre-work to really prepare us for the retreat. So when we go into the retreat, there'll be a good structure, straw man that we can work from to have a really productive conversation, which will further inform this the study committee, excuse me, the subcommittee rather, as it works to make its produce its report. So Tammy, I don't know if you wanted to offer any other comment on that.
No, I think that's exactly it. And the subcommittee, we will be working to get together and start our work here soon. I've been working to get up to speed over the last few weeks with just coming on the board. So we'll be starting our work here shortly.
Yep. And as I indicated, I did reach out to both the chair of the House and the Senate Education Committees and asked for a little bit of grace on the deadline. Obviously, you know, there is a statutory deadline and in December to submit a report. But I have sort of an informal agreement, if you will, between the chair of the Senate Education Committee and the full committee of the House Education Committee, that we would, submit a report in December as a sort of a placeholder, with the expectation that a more comprehensive report would be available later in January to give us some more time. And everybody felt that was a reasonable request, even if technically we still have to submit something in December. Okay, so more to come on, and we will reach out separately once we have a better sense of when we want to plan the retreat. So next on the agenda is item P, which is sort of agenda and work plan. So I'd like to go back to Mr. Tinney's comments earlier, and reading and as well as the comments we heard earlier from our student members, and just general sort of reading of some media reports. I think it's worth us convening a conversation at our next meeting on some of the general themes that were raised, and perhaps invite a few key stakeholders to share their perspectives. And some of these things, there may not be specific action that we as a board can take, but I think understanding more about the dynamic on the ground would be important and may help inform some of our work, particularly as we may be opening up the EQS rules in January, as we alluded to earlier, with respect to the Act 1 work. So I think it would be sort of helpful to have some background information and some discussion. The other thing I want to sort of add to the table as well, that I think we may want to have as a discussion at a future meeting, is as I'm sure many of you have been reading, some really troubling accounts around athletic events, and both some offensive behavior that is racially motivated, as well as sexually motivated as well. So some really concerning behavior, and I think concerns in the public about the safeguards we have out there to ensure that our student athletes are able to compete in a safe and welcoming environment. So I think that may be worth a conversation that we could convene at a future meeting. And then the third, Patrick and I have had some conversation. He brought it up at a prior meeting around inviting some members of from sort of the Winooski, Burlington area to share the perspective of sort of education in a multicultural environment. So that's something else I'd like to get on the agenda for November. So those are just some preliminary thoughts. I'd sort of open it up for board comments or other suggestions.
Guess I'm just wondering if Dan will have some comments on either of those two pieces, the health and welfare of our students. And I know that you have made some comments about the immediate need to do some things. And also my hope that there is a pretty clear and immediate response, which could be education when it comes to the extracurricular pieces you're talking about, Oliver. I think we need now to take that very seriously. Part of that is education. So I don't know if Dan has any comments coming up in his report, but I'll wait for that. Thank you.
Other comments or suggestions?
Well, I guess in your first ask around like social emotional status of kids, and I wonder from Dan's perspective, are there schools that had, before the pandemic, had strong SEL programs? And would those be schools that we'd be looking to hear from, and how their work prior to the pandemic has helped them now? And
why don't maybe Dan can address that in his report, so we'll come back to that. So just to keep it focused on sort of, would you agree, Jenna, that this is a good topic for our next meeting to put on the agenda?
Yes.
Okay. Jennifer.
Well, just a reminder that we'll do the recognition of Kathy Lavoie at the next meeting, as well as another independent school rules subcommittee update, which actually, I think the next time we meet, we will have concluded our public comment hearing phase. So, you know, the universe should be closing, which is kind of exciting.
Yes. Wonderful. Okay. Other thoughts? Okay. Wonderful. So I think that, oh, sorry, Kim.
That's okay. I may be more appropriate after Dan, but I do think that we should think about if there is a beneficial statement that we can offer around these matters that is sort of in line with our responsibilities in, you know, education leadership and acknowledgement and, you know, gratitude for the work that's happening in the face of this. So I don't know if that is better informed, or if Dan knows to what extent something to that effect would be beneficial even between now and November meeting, because these are real sort of crises among staff and students, I think, in now. So if there's something we can be doing now, Dan, I hope you'll share your thoughts on that as well.
Yeah. Okay. That's a good segue. We'll hear the secretary's report, and Dan, love your thoughts on that. And I think at the very least, Kim, we should think about having something on the agenda under that subject we're already talking about, and perhaps you might want to take a stab at drafting something between now and then. That'd be great. Okay. Mr. Secretary.
Yeah, I appreciate the opportunity to have a few minutes to reflect on these topics. I'm not quite sure where to begin, honestly. Yeah. You know, if I develop my bulleted list, I, of course, would have comments on unprecedented global pandemic that we're still living with, significant demographic and workforce challenges that are beyond just education, obviously. 200 years of racial tensions that have never really been resolved successfully in our country. Unprecedented mental health needs in our broader anxiety in our society and present in our kids in schools. I mean, those are just some of my high level wave tops, if you will. But and you can still see I have my sense of humor. In terms of COVID, just real quick, I think the big, you know, we're sort of at a phase of our response where, you know, vaccination's a critical piece of that. I think the thing that's on the immediate horizon, which we're expecting soon, I think on October 26th, is approval for emergency use of vaccination for students aged 5 to 11. So that'll be a major focus in the coming weeks. And really will probably shift some of the trajectory of our response in the coming months. So I think you can anticipate student vaccination to be a priority through the next sort of the holiday period, if you will, and then post holiday after the first of the year, really starting to see a pivot in where we go from there. Essentially, at that point, we will have vaccinated everyone who's interested in being vaccinated, would be my hope. We also have, you know, new technologies and therapies emerging. So what you start to see internationally is a conversation about sort of transitioning from pandemic to endemic management and starting to focus more on preventing the most severe outcomes from the virus and the disease. So you'll see that emerge as well. I've been talking a lot about different testing technologies and so forth, test to say, we can get into, but there's also just new tools in our toolkit all the time, which is, you know, new treatments and therapies and so forth also on the horizon. In terms of the workforce, I thought I'd make a few comments on that. This is a required area of activity for all states as part of their ESSER plans to focus on the impact of the pandemic on educator workforce issues. And to Mr. Tinney's comments, it's not just teachers, it's bus drivers. And we say education workforce, it's all the parts of sustaining those operations. I think I can divide that conversation into two parts. There's a sort of a longer term strategic focus, and then there's the near term need. I think the requirement that's in our state plan is more of the strategic, long-term focus. So we are going to be contracting out essentially for a study of our regulations in Vermont to see what regulatory changes could be made to better position the state to sustain education in a context of shortages. And I think I could conclude that our regulations have been slow to respond to that challenge. We've known the demographic issues have been on the horizon, heading our way. We're the second oldest state in the country, and we haven't been very quick to adapt our regulatory scheme to that. So we'll be commissioning the study to look at our regulations from that perspective. Also trying to identify what other states are doing, particularly other rural states, and then asking some strategies to be surfaced through that analysis of where we should go in terms of policy to navigate and sustain the education system through a time when there might be fewer adults available to provision the services for kids. And so that's sort of the long-term trajectory. It doesn't get to the immediate need. And the immediate need is I've been in lots of conversations where very similar to Mr. Tinney, and Mr. Tinney's been in a lot of those conversations with us. We're really good at diagnosing the problem. We're kind of less quick at putting concrete solutions on the table because I don't think anyone has any quick solutions to the crisis. We are, it's been an on and off conversation with our various stakeholder groups, including Vermont NEA, to form a task force to take a look at that. And that's indeed what we're about to do. Probably have that meet in November. Again, I think we'll be probably 90% focused on diagnosis of the problem and less able to put concrete solutions on the table, but we're going to do our best working together to try to start to do that. Part of what we'll get out of the sort of the larger strategic conversation is a quantification of what the problem is. So we have anecdotal, conversations around bus driver shortage or special educator shortages, but to start to understand a little better how those needs are playing out in the landscape, I think is going to be a critical part of where we go relative to policy, because like most things in our education system, I would imagine there's significant regional variation in what the needs are. In terms of the, I'll say the social emotional well-being, we had anticipated, I think 3 times now, sort of pivoting our education system to focus on education recovery, meaning to start to work on the impact of the emergency on our students and to understand what those needs were going to be. When I say 3 times, we thought the pandemic was over last October, before Halloween, pretty much at this time of year. And I don't say it was over, but we were anticipating, we had figured it out. We had opened schools successfully last year, and we're anticipating smoother sailing ahead of us. And then, through the holiday period, we saw the escalation of case counts. We got through the holiday period, and we anticipated everything being okay after the holiday period. So we started a second sort of planning iteration. At that point, we did identify this phrase, education recovery, and our 3 focus areas of academics, social, emotional well-being, and re-engagement. And then shortly after the first year, we had to put that on the back burner again as we started to experience escalated case counts through the winter months. And it was only in the spring, with the advent of vaccination, essentially, that we could really start to plan to point the system towards that recovery. And that sort of manifests itself in 2 strategies. One was the Summer Matters campaign for the summer, was that we intentionally were signaling that we were going to spend the summer re-engaging with students with the hope that when we open the school this fall, things would be back to normal, more or less, and that we'd be able to start to unpack student need in the other 2 areas, academics and social emotional impact. And the way we had anticipated doing that in the fall, this is pre-Delta, was that we would get school reopened, sort of a continuation of the re-engagement aspect of Summer Matters. And then towards the end of September, we would sort of get through the honeymoon period, if you will. Everyone would be excited to be back to school. And then towards the end of September, some of the behaviors and the social emotional issues would start to become more present. We'd be able to really start to point the system to react to that. The reason I mentioned Delta is, of course, Delta has prevented us from doing that to a large extent, and also has created a whole new slew of anxieties, I would argue. You know, we thought we would be doing much better due to our high vaccination rate. And, you know, we are doing better in terms of the critical outcomes. Certainly the vaccines work in terms of preventing, you know, serious illness and disease and death. But I think we had a greater perception that it would stop the transmissibility of the virus, and perhaps the previous variants it would have, but the Delta variant has proved elusive at best in that regard. So unfortunately now we're seeing kind of our prediction before of the social emotional impact of last year and the pandemic and all those anxieties inherent in our society today coming to the forefront in our schools. At the same time, we're trying to navigate some of the most challenging moments from a public health perspective, which again, I think we have the tools coming online to start to do that, but it's a challenging moment for the system for sure. So I don't really have much to say relative to policy implications, other than I will be participating in a meeting with the House Ed Committee next week, and I'll, as I have with the School Board Association, sort of been trying to make a sense from a policy perspective of where we might want to go as an education system. But as you're well aware, we're very much also involved in sort of day-to-day management of a critical moment in our public health response statewide. And I will say the last couple of days, you know, a couple of days don't make a trend. Case counts are down significantly in the last couple of days, but we always saw hospitalization rates as a lagging indicator. So what we're starting to see, I say today and yesterday and the last several days, is increased pressure on our hospital system from the case counts that were elevated a week or so ago. So, you know, that's the kind of the up and down we're sort of navigating. And I don't think anyone can really predict the future trend of the virus that well, but we are cautiously optimistic. But we are laser focused on ensuring the viability of our health care system, and that remains a priority. And it's still very much true that the trends we're navigating are really affecting the unvaccinated more so than the vaccinated. So that presents a whole nother dynamic. I'll just end on saying we are about to also stand up our first data collection of the fall, where we're going to be quantifying vaccination rates of students and staff across the state. I think this will be part of our policy going forward after January, where you know, I think my impression is we have a high consistency of staff vaccination in our education system. We think it's over 90%, and I think we're going to find that's fairly consistent across the state. I don't think the same is true of the student vaccination rate. We have statewide, we have one of the highest student vaccination rates in the country. I think it's over 77%. But what I'm seeing across the state on my site visits is that rate varies significantly. We have schools that are over 90%. We have schools that are closer to 40%. And unfortunately, those differences are going to play out based on their experience on attendance and contact tracing and so forth. So increasingly, I think our policy will focus in on those places that have been more reticent to get vaccinated or participate in some of the necessary mitigation strategies to ensure continuity of education for our students. So anyway, I'll end there. I'd be happy to elaborate on any of those points in the remaining time.
Are there any questions from board members for the secretary? Tom and then Kim. Oh, you're on mute, Tom. Tom, you're on mute. There you go. You're on mute again. I think we'll come back to you, Tom. Why don't we go to Kim and then we'll go back to you, Tom. Kim?
Thank you. I am wondering if you have any thoughts regarding, you had listed in your high level list the racial tensions and how they are playing out through our education system. And I'm wondering if you want to share any thoughts there, sort of a disconnect between even districts and how they are interpreting the experiences. And I'm just wondering what you think.
Yeah, I mean, I think that, particularly anti-CRT sort of pushback that we were seeing manifest itself at school board meetings in the spring, starting in the spring as part of a national sort of coordinated effort. Districts like yours experienced as well. We've been kind of, I don't say monitoring that. I did intervene to a certain extent with Springfield School Board. I wrote that board a letter. They were in the process of considering adopting an anti-CRT resolution that had been shared with them, I think, from a Colorado model. I mean, so that conversation has a trajectory, but there's also just the broader issues of, I'll say, racial tension that were percolating, have been percolating in our country for over 200 years, as I alluded to, and certainly in the last year have brought us to another moment in our history. And I think every generation in our country struggles with these moments. It's challenging to do that in the context of the pandemic, because I think it's just heightened so much of the divisiveness that's always been below the surface to a certain extent. And from my perspective, we see that playing out in our schools and at school board meetings around the state. So on the one hand, we've been, I would say, cautious not to throw more gas on the fire, so to speak, but been monitoring those conversations. At the same time, we're also seeking to build a coalition of folks to create a sort of a central or main way folks on different ends of the spectrum of this debate, if you will, could participate and find consensus and agree on civility. Last year, we've sponsored a fairly comprehensive policy initiative in the legislature to deal with issues of hate and racial discrimination. We didn't make a lot of progress on that, but I intend to bring that forward again. I think it's important that hate issues and racial discrimination issues rise to the level of a mandatory policy requirement for school boards to give them that sort of uniform tool. And I don't think there was much interest in that last year. I'm hoping there's more interest in that this year. The mascot issue and so forth would live under that. So I think we have some work to do in that area from a policy perspective. And I've certainly been working and talking with V.S.A around their role relative to the curricular issues, co-curricular issues that have been challenging in the last couple of months to navigate. But as I mentioned, I think in one press conference, what's equally disturbing is that they're apparently long-standing behaviors that have been sort of tolerated over the years. We're hearing that from students. So the adults, and I'd put all of us in that container, have a responsibility to act. And we have to figure out how to do that. I'm not convinced yet whether further structural changes are necessary to do that. I'd like to see the system as we know it try to respond to those issues. And I'm not convinced we have done that adequately yet. I think there's been delays in investigations, and we've been a little slow to try to focus in on who the individual actors are in this. Simultaneously, we are examining the broader educational responses that we can do. So I know V.S.A is doing training with the coaches and referees and so forth to heighten their awareness. But we need to elevate these things to in a more immediate sense, so that the reaction is quicker. And I'm not convinced we're there yet.
Okay. Tom, you want to try again? Oh, he can't unmute his phone. Alrighty. Well, so I think that can, Dan, anything else from you?
No, I'm thinking of just the policy trajectory. As I mentioned, we'll be working on, I think CT will be a major focus of our policy work, but just to sort of, situate the board relative to that conversation inside the administration's policy work, because the state board is a part of the executive branch. we typically start working simultaneously through the summer on policy initiatives as well as budget, the state budget. And at some point, those two come together. That's starting to happen now. So really, as we go into November, this becomes a period of pretty intense policy work for us as well as budget work. And that comes together ultimately with the governor identifying his priorities. So part of what I've been doing through the month of September and October is reaching out to different stakeholder groups to say, you know, here are some ideas of the policy themes. There's so much on the table right now. And rightfully, people are looking for the state government to help address some of these broader societal issues. So we're going to struggle, I think, keeping coherence on where we should be putting our efforts and our limited financial resources. But I think there's also a lot of opportunity in front of us as well, I think, and we should seek to leverage that. So I'll be happy to, you'll hear me talk at the committee next week. But if there's issues that the agency can support the board in enacting or refining, we're happy to do that. CTE, as I expect, is a big policy area for us, and that's going to require quite a bit of technical expertise from the agency to refine. But I think it's one of those areas in sort of the education contribution to the issue of workforce development and the broader demographic challenges, which are just sort of foundational to so many of the issues we're having as a state right now.
Great. So before we close out the meeting, I just want to circle back to our discussion around agenda planning, and that was somewhat precipitated by the comments from Mr. Tinney. So I see Mr. Tinney's with us. I also see we've got Jay Nichols, Sue Siglowski, and the Superintendent's Association on the line. So Don, I just want to check in with you if you can hear me and you're still with us, to make sure that you're good to come back and spend some more time with us at our November meeting.
Absolutely, sure. Thank you.
Excellent, wonderful. And Jay and Sue, just on some of those issues, as well as the extracurricular concerns around the extracurricular activities, are you guys prepared to be part of a conversation next month?
So this is Jay. Absolutely, we're doing a lot of work on this right now. We're working with the superintendents and the athletic directors. We've got a new statement policy that's in place. We're working with both schools that are involved. The timeline's been extended because both schools took a long time to do their investigations. So we've got a lot of things in play that we'd be glad to share with you, Oliver.
Okay, that'd be great. Sue Siglowski?
Yes, thank you. I'm here, and yes, we'd be happy to participate as well. Thank you.
Okay, great. And I don't know if Jeff Francis is with us. I saw him earlier, but he may not be on anymore. So, okay, I'll follow up with him offline. Okay, wonderful discussion. I apologize to all for our little bit of confusion at the start of the meeting, but glad to see we're more or less able to bring it to a close more or less on time. We needed a little extra time on some of the school approvals. So I think that was time well spent, and we'll probably make some adjustments to the timing for our next round of approvals once they come up next meeting. So unless there are any other final comments, I would entertain a motion to adjourn. Oh, Kim. Oh, I'll take that as a move to adjourn.
I second.
That was it.
Okay.
That was what I was going for.
Moved by Kim and seconded by Patrick to adjourn. All those in favor of adjourning, please raise your hand and say yes.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
All right. Wonderful. We'll let you go. Have a wonderful day. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thanks, everybody. Bye-bye. Have a good day.